in a nation that split the atom, walked on the moon, and invented spray cheese. Sometimes brilliance takes a lunch break. Welcome to the other side of U.S. history, where laws defy logic, towns are named after bodily functions, and someone once sued themselves. This isn't the America they teach in school. This is law. 99 dumbest things in U.S. history. And yes, every single one of them actually happened. In 1978, the U.S. government accidentally dropped a nuclear bomb over North Carolina, and it almost detonated. It's 1978, and the United States Air Force misplaces a nuclear bomb. Not in the figurative, bureaucratic sense, but quite literally. A B-52 bomber broke apart midair over Goldsboro, North Carolina, and 2 thermonuclear bombs fell from the sky. One deployed its parachute. The other didn't. That second one slammed into the ground with such force that parts of it vanished into the earth and had to be left there, still underground to this day. But here's the fun part. One of the bombs came within one single safety switch of detonating. Had it gone off, it would have been 260 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The official report used the phrase, "a margin of safety that was dangerously small." This wasn't a rogue accident in a war zone. It was a Tuesday, over a farming town. And the bomb that almost wiped it off the map, we lost it, or buried it, or just left it there and politely forgot. America, the only country in history to drop nukes in war, nearly nuked itself by accident, and moved on like it was a clerical error. But if you think the worst part is how close we came to vaporizing North Carolina, just wait until you hear about intercourse. There's a town in Pennsylvania called Intercourse, and it's right next to a town called Bird in Hand. If the bomb didn't kill us, the names might. Nestled quietly in Amish country is the town of Intercourse, Pennsylvania, a wholesome little place where buggies outnumber cars and churning butter might still be a competitive sport. But let's not ignore the fact that someone, somewhere, looked at a perfectly good village and thought, you know what this place needs? A name that makes tourists giggle like drunk hyenas. And if Intercourse wasn't enough, just a few miles away sits another charmer, Bird in Hand. Combine them, and you've basically got a Craigslist personals ad. The name Intercourse actually predates its modern connotations. It originally referred to fellowship and social interaction, which, to be fair, still feels weird when you say, I spent a lovely weekend in Intercourse. The townspeople have long embraced the name, plastering it on mugs, t-shirts, and novelty road signs that are stolen so often the town budget probably just includes a line item called pervert souvenirs. And yet, in a nation where naming a kid Apple is considered quirky, the town of Intercourse is still the one getting side eyes, which says something. But speaking of laws that make less sense than the name of this town, in Alabama, it is illegal to wear a fake mustache in church that causes laughter. Let's talk facial hair and divine punishment. In Alabama, a law still technically on the books prohibits wearing a fake mustache in church if, and only if, it causes laughter. Which raises 1,000 questions and answers none. Was there an epidemic of imposter mustaches? Did the Lord strike down a particularly comedic handlebar during communion? Or did some mustachioed outlaw just push it too far during Easter service? This is the kind of law that reads like a fever dream and gets enforced like a dare. Somewhere there's a judge who probably had to keep a straight face while sentencing a man in a Groucho Marx disguise for inciting holy giggles. The law likely originates from a puritanical obsession with reverence, or maybe just a deacon's traumatic memory of someone snorting during hymn 42. But it's also a perfect microcosm of America's favorite pastime, legislating vibes. Our founding fathers were debating democracy while their descendants were drafting bills about mustaches, and no one batted an eye. Because when it comes to absurdity in the courts, nothing beats the day a man sued himself. A California man once sued himself and asked the state to pay because he couldn't work due to his own negligence. In the annals of American litigation, a glorious archive of coffee burn lawsuits, parking ticket appeals, and emotional distress caused by reality TV, there exists a man who decided to take legal absurdity to its logical extreme. He sued himself. And he lost. But not in the way you might think. This California man, in a burst of either divine genius or weaponized stupidity, filed a lawsuit against himself for violating his own civil rights. Why? Because his own negligence led to his own injuries, and he couldn't work anymore. So in a moment of infinite recursion, he sued himself. Then, in a plot twist worthy of Kafka filtered through a bong hit, he requested that the state pay the settlement. After all, he argued, he didn't have the money. And since he was now legally owed that money, someone had to cough it up. Why not the taxpayers? This wasn't some prank. This was filed in earnest. A man sat down, drafted a legal document naming himself as both the plaintiff and the defendant, and asked for a payout from himself, on behalf of himself, and somewhere a clerk had to process that. The best part? The case was taken seriously enough to reach higher court consideration. Because America doesn't just love suing. America respects the hell out of paperwork. The man lost, of course. Not because it was ridiculous, but because, and this is real, you can't collect damages from yourself and then demand the government play bank. But it's a beautiful metaphor, isn't it? The land of rugged individualism, suing its own reflection and asking the government to step in as sugar daddy. And if you think that's strange, just wait until we get to Thomas Jefferson and his personal quest to believe in Bigfoot's prehistoric cousin. Thomas Jefferson believed in mastodons roaming the American wilderness long after they were extinct. Let's set the scene. You're Thomas Jefferson, founding father, architect of democracy, Enlightenment thinker, and deeply convinced that somewhere in the American frontier, enormous elephant-like monsters are stomping around in secret. Yes, Jefferson, the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence with all the philosophical elegance of a European salon guest, also believed mastodons might still be lurking west of the Mississippi. This wasn't idle curiosity. Jefferson was obsessed. He collected mastodon bones, studied fossils, and refused to accept extinction as a possibility, calling it contrary to nature. The very concept offended him. To Jefferson, nature was too orderly, too divinely balanced to just lose an entire species. So he figured they must still be out there, massive, tusked, and camera-shy, wandering the untouched corners of the continent like ancient gods of the tree line. He even sent explorers, including Lewis and Clark, westward, not just to map rivers and trade routes, but to keep an eye out for any oversized, hairy mammals that look suspiciously prehistoric. Picture it, America's most iconic expedition, tasked with founding national infrastructure, and casually mammoth spotting on the side. There's something beautifully American about Jefferson's logic. If we can't see the mastodons, it's not because they're extinct. It's because we haven't looked hard enough. Reality was negotiable. Evidence was optional. Belief was destiny. And when facts get in the way, we just declare independence from them. But if you think founding fathers believing in cryptids is where the weirdness stops, buckle up. The next state over, they had a much more grounded policy for personal hygiene. A Kentucky law requires citizens to bathe at least once a year. Kentucky, home of bourbon, bluegrass, and evidently, the bare minimum of personal cleanliness. Tucked away in the state's legal code is a rule that sounds less like a law and more like a gentle suggestion with teeth. You must bathe at least once a year. Just once. 12 months, one bath. Anything more is just showing off. No one's entirely sure how this law originated, but the implications are as American as apple pie dipped in hand sanitizer. First, it means there was a time when someone was so committed to stinking, the government had to intervene. Someone was out here making biohazards look fresh, and rather than ostracizing them socially, the solution was to legislate a calendar event called mandatory hygiene. It's a law that assumes the best and expects the worst. We believe in your freedom, but we're also scheduling your annual bath just in case. And it gets funnier when you realize there's probably no enforcement. No bath police knocking on doors. No bath registry. It's a law that's all threat and no follow-through, which makes it very American. But don't laugh too hard. Because right across the border, another town took its own name straight from a punchline. A town in Oklahoma is named Hooker. Its slogan is proudly, "It's a location, not a vocation." There are towns that choose dignity. Others choose legacy. And then there's Hooker, Oklahoma, a small town with a population barely large enough to fill a high school gymnasium and a name bold enough to make every road sign a magnet for theft. Its official slogan, emblazoned on everything from T-shirts to bumper stickers, reads, "It's a location, not a vocation." A reminder that no matter how funny you think you are, they've already heard the joke. Hooker wasn't named for scandal or irony. It was named after a man, a cattle foreman named John Hooker Threlkeld. That's it. That's the whole origin story. And yet, for generations, locals have had to explain to out-of-towners, tourists, and mailmen that yes, their return address is real, and no, they're not kidding. You live in Hooker. Deal with it. There's something unintentionally noble about the town's unwavering embrace of its own name. Most towns would change it, rebrand. Go with something safe like Elm Grove or Pleasant View, but not Hooker. Hooker looked destiny in the eye and said, "We'll make it a joke before you can." And that's the trick. They owned it before it owned them. The name became armor, unironically printed on keychains, city hall doors, and Facebook events like Hooker Days. It's Americana at its most ridiculous. Small-town pride so stubborn it becomes defiant art. But before you judge a town by its innuendo, consider this. Some states weren't naming towns. They were passing laws that make Hooker sound like Harvard. In Texas, it is illegal to sell your eye. Texas, land of open carry, rugged individualism, and the sacred right to do whatever you want with your body, unless you want to sell your eyeball. That, apparently, crosses a line. The Lone Star State has it codified. You can donate your organs, sure. But if you try to flip your cornea for cash, you're committing a crime. The law itself was likely intended to prevent organ trafficking, protect vulnerable people from exploitation, and discourage black market butchery. But in true American fashion, it ends up sounding like the punchline to a joke no one quite finished. As if one day a legislator slammed a gavel and yelled, "We've got to draw the line somewhere." And the line was ocular capitalism. Imagine the scene. A man, down on his luck, staring into a mirror and weighing the pros and cons of monocular living in exchange for rent money. Maybe he's got a Craigslist ad half-written, slightly used, great peripheral vision, no refunds. And then a cop kicks down the door like it's a sting operation on Blackbeard's organ warehouse. The irony, of course, is that Texas is a state where you can buy a flamethrower more easily than you can sell your own body parts. You can sell your plasma. You can sell your hair. Hell, in some towns, you can sell rattlesnake meat on a stick. But sell your eye? Suddenly, it's a crime against the state. It's the kind of moral line that makes no practical sense but feels culturally right. Like saying, you can do anything, just don't make it weird. And speaking of weird traditions, let's take a look at how the father of our country tried to fix illness with medieval plumbing logic. George Washington believed in bloodletting and actually requested it on his deathbed, which may have hastened his death. America's first president didn't just lead a revolution. He also put his faith in one of the most disturbingly stupid medical practices in history, bloodletting. And not reluctantly either. George Washington was an enthusiastic fan of the old theory that illness came from an imbalance of bodily fluids, and that if you just drained enough blood, balance would be restored. When he caught what may have been a throat infection on a cold December night, Washington didn't reach for rest or tea. He asked for the leeches, and then more leeches, and then a scalpel. By the end of the ordeal, his doctors had drained nearly half his blood volume in a desperate effort to save him. Or, more accurately, to perform a slow, respectable medical homicide. And here's the wild part. He didn't just allow it. He insisted on it. The father of the nation, in his final hours, put more trust in 18th century blood drainage than in the body's immune system. And while some historians still argue about the exact cause of death, many agree on this. Had they simply left him alone, George might have survived. Instead, he bled out in what was essentially a patriotic ritual sacrifice to the god of outdated science. It's the kind of ending that's both ironic and quintessentially American. A man who conquered empires, felled tyranny, and crossed the Delaware in winter was ultimately defeated by a bucket. And while you're sitting with that image, the literal draining of America's first leader, let's fast forward to another American icon who was nearly undone by something even more diabolical, a missing McNugget. A 911 call in Florida involved a woman who was furious McDonald's ran out of chicken McNuggets. It was 2009 in Florida, a state that by now deserves its own category of emergency services. A woman dialed 911 not to report a crime or a fire or a life-threatening situation, but to declare war on McDonald's. Her emergency? The McNuggets were gone, sold out. The golden chunks of processed poultry she had paid for with sacred legal tender were now unavailable, and in her mind the only appropriate response was full police intervention. The transcript is breathtaking. She demands that officers arrive and resolve the injustice. She insists that the cashier is refusing to refund her, and when told that McDonald's being out of stock is not a criminal matter, she doubles down, certain that somewhere in the Constitution there's a clause about life, liberty, and the pursuit of McNuggets. The police showed up, not to arrest the staff, but to file a report on her, because you can't just treat 911 like Yelp with sirens. But in that moment, her logic made a terrifying kind of sense. If justice doesn't protect your nuggets, what good is civilization? And just when you think it can't get dumber, let me introduce you to the town that legally has no name. There's a no-name town in Colorado, literally. It's called No Name. Drive through the Rocky Mountains and you'll eventually hit an exit that looks like a glitch in the Matrix. No Name. That's not an error. That's not a missing label. That is the town's name. No Name, Colorado. A place that feels like it was named by someone who either gave up, had a bureaucratic stroke, or simply answered the question, "What's the name?" with no name. And the clerk wrote it down as gospel. Originally, No Name was just a placeholder on highway plans, a temporary marker. But then it stuck. And when officials asked locals if they wanted to change it, they collectively shrugged and said, nah. Because why not? In a world full of Hopewells and Springfields, No Name feels like a cosmic joke, a blank space that demands to be noticed. But there's something beautifully existential about it too. Like the town is quietly rebelling against identity itself. Tourists come for the photo op. Locals stay for the irony. And somewhere, there's a guy who has No Name, Colorado as his return address, just waiting for the post office to call bluff. But not every identity crisis is geographical. Some are deeply personal, like when a man decides to steal a $1 pack of gum and call it justice. A North Carolina man was once arrested for stealing a $1 pack of gum and claimed it was a test of the system. Most petty thefts are, well, petty. But this one came with a manifesto. A man in North Carolina walked into a store, grabbed a humble pack of gum, something minty and unremarkable, and walked out without paying. Security intervened. He didn't run. Instead, he told them he wanted to get caught. It was a test, he said. A test of the system. Now, you can read this two ways. Either he was making a point about over-policing, disproportionate punishment, and the ways our justice system spins its wheels on crumbs. Or he was just a guy bored out of his mind who wanted to see what would happen if he became a philosophical shoplifter. Regardless, he was arrested, processed, booked, for $1 worth of chewing gum, which means dozens of taxpayer-funded hours went into this man's low-stakes experiment in civil disobedience. And maybe that was the point. That even in a country with crumbling infrastructure and unsolved crimes, we'll still throw the book at you for 5 sticks of artificially flavored rebellion. But if gum theft as performance art seems strange, just wait until you hear what Arizona has to say about donkeys and bathtubs. In Arizona, it's illegal for a donkey to sleep in a bathtub. There are laws that protect people. There are laws that protect animals. And then there are laws like this one. Laws forged in the molten lava of one deeply unfortunate Tuesday in the American Southwest. In Arizona, it is explicitly illegal for a donkey to sleep in a bathtub. Not to nap in one. Not to rest its hooves near one. But to sleep in one. As if that's the line where society crumbles. This isn't metaphor. This isn't folklore. It's law. And the story behind it, the legend that floats around legislative halls like a half-remembered fever dream, goes something like this. In the 1920s, a rancher had a pet donkey who liked to lounge in an abandoned bathtub out on his property. Totally normal. Until a flash flood came through, picked up the bathtub, donkey and all, and sent it sailing downstream like a biblical escape pod. Local authorities were forced to stage a rescue operation. A donkey in a mobile tub barreling through the desert landscape like some cursed soap commercial. The town, traumatized, did what any town would do, passed a law. No more donkey naps in tubs, period. Of course, rather than questioning why bathtubs were being used as furniture for livestock, or why flood management was non-existent, the solution was to criminalize the donkey. Classic. We can't fix the system, but we can ban your farm animals' sleeping preferences. And if you think this is as absurd as laws get, keep your voltage low. Because the next guy accidentally electrocuted himself trying to kill a turkey. Ben Franklin once tried to electrocute a turkey on purpose and accidentally shocked himself unconscious. Benjamin Franklin. Printer, inventor, diplomat, and, unfortunately for Thanksgiving, an experimental chef. Among his lesser-known pursuits was a peculiar obsession with electricity, which he believed at one point could be used to kill and cook turkeys in a more enlightened manner. You know, for science. Or lunch. Franklin set up a demonstration, eager to prove his electrical prowess by shocking a turkey to death with raw voltage. His hope? A quick, efficient, perhaps even humane demise. What he got instead was poetic justice in the form of a powerful electrical discharge. Right into his own body, he knocked himself unconscious, reportedly with his arms flailing, his pride fried, and the turkey very much alive. This is the man who discovered lightning's secrets, who helped draft the Declaration of Independence, who became the face of the $100 bill. And yet, he's also the man who essentially tasered himself into a blackout while trying to gourmet zap a bird. You might call it hubris, or karma, or just Franklin doing Franklin things. But it's the kind of historical anecdote that should be etched on monuments. A founding father knocked cold by his own invention in pursuit of a better-tasting holiday dinner. But speaking of fried expectations, let's talk about the customer who wanted a refund for their dead Christmas tree. In January, a customer once returned a Christmas tree to Costco in January, asking for a refund because it was dead. America is many things, a land of opportunity, a cradle of contradiction, and most importantly, a return policy paradise. No story better encapsulates that than the legend of the woman who walked into a Costco after New Year's, receipt in hand, tree in tow, and demanded a refund for her Christmas tree. Why? Because it was dead, as in brown, as in needleless, as in exactly what happens to pine trees that have been chopped down, hauled into living rooms, wrapped in lights, and left to die slowly in front of fireplaces. That was the plan. But to her, the transaction had failed. The tree had expired, and someone owed her justice. Here's the kicker. Costco gave her the refund, partly because Costco will refund just about anything, and partly, one assumes, out of sheer awe, because this wasn't a refund request. It was performance art. A perfect blend of gall, entitlement, and unshakable belief in customer sovereignty. She played the system like a fiddle strung with tinsel. And in that moment, she wasn't just a shopper. She was an icon, a cautionary tale, a consumer oracle reminding us that, in the American soul, the phrase "you can't be serious" is just an invitation to try. And from the dead tree capital of bold returns, we head to a town that literally changed its name because of a quiz show. There's a Truth or Consequences town in New Mexico, renamed after a radio quiz show. In 1950, the people of Hot Springs, New Mexico, gathered around their radios, not to hear about war or politics or a presidential address, but to listen to a quiz show. Truth or Consequences was a long-running program where contestants either answered questions correctly or had to endure ridiculous stunts when they failed. It was silly. It was popular. It was the kind of American escapism that turned humiliation into entertainment. Then came the moment of nationwide absurdity. Ralph Edwards, the show's host, announced that he'd air a special episode live from the first town willing to rename itself Truth or Consequences. Most cities laughed. One didn't. Hot Springs, a town already juggling a gimmick of its own, raised its hand. They voted. They meant it. And just like that, an actual functioning town full of schools, families, and taxpayers officially swapped its name for a punchline. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't temporary. It was branding before branding was cool. The town still goes by it. They even hold an annual festival in the show's honor. Think about it. An entire town rebranded itself for radio clout. That's not civic pride. That's peak America. A place where identity can be sold to the highest bidder if it comes with decent PR. But if you think that's the most pointless thing men did during their leisure time, just wait until New Jersey comes along to ban knitting. During fishing season. In New Jersey, it's technically illegal for men to knit during fishing season. Picture it. It's a crisp October morning. The river's cold. The fish are biting. And a man sits on the dock, not with bait, but with yarn. Needles clicking. Calm, serene. Until suddenly, sirens. Because in New Jersey, there's a law that, on paper, makes it illegal for men to knit during fishing season. Let's pause here. Not illegal to fish while knitting. Not illegal to ignore fishing. Just illegal to knit. As if one form of sitting quietly and doing nothing was federally prioritized over another. The origins of this law are lost to time. But the message is timeless. Masculinity is for rods and reels, not scarves and socks. Fishing season, apparently, is sacred. And in that sacred space, yarn has no place. The law may never be enforced, probably hasn't been in 100 years, but it sits there in the books, like a ghost of 19th century paranoia that someone might be enjoying something too soft. It's the kind of legislation that could only emerge from a culture both obsessed with productivity and terrified of comfort. And yet, even that pales next to the man who wrestled over 300 matches and still chose Honest Abe as a nickname. Abraham Lincoln wrestled over 300 matches and only lost once. But his wrestling name? Honest Abe. Before he was the towering, top-hatted oracle of emancipation, Abraham Lincoln was a lanky backwoods bruiser with fists, feet, and a wrestling record that would make a UFC champion blink. Over 300 matches, one loss. And this wasn't polite collegiate wrestling. This was frontier brawling, shirtless, muddy, and probably full of improvised rules like you lose if you're unconscious, and his wrestling name? Honest Abe. Which is hilarious. Because nothing says ready to rip your spine out, like branding yourself as trustworthy. It was either genius marketing or the purest form of irony. A man who could beat you senseless while reminding you that he was emotionally available and wouldn't lie about it. Lincoln's physicality often gets buried under stovepipe hats and melancholy quotes, but make no mistake, he was a beast. He once stopped a street fight by picking up the aggressor like a sack of flour. He was known for grabbing dudes by the collar mid-argument and reminding them that yes, the law mattered, but so did having your teeth still attached. This was a man who could win debates with words and bar fights with reach. And somewhere between headlocks and heartfelt monologues, he built a reputation that carried all the way to the White House. And if that's not enough cognitive dissonance, get ready for a town in Oregon whose name will leave you wondering if it was all just a long, sad inside joke. A town in Oregon is named Boring. It has a sister city in Scotland named Dull. There's a peculiar art to naming towns. Some go aspirational, liberty, prosper, hope. Others go geographic, Riverbend, Mountain View. And then there's Boring, Oregon, a town that didn't even try to fake it. It just came out and told the truth. No pretense, no flash, just boring. To be fair, Boring was named after a man, William H. Boring, a Union soldier turned settler. But the name stuck for reasons nobody could quite undo, and rather than fight it, the town embraced it like a shrug in municipal form. Their welcome signs even say it with pride. The most exciting place to live is Boring, but the true masterstroke? In 2012, Boring formed a partnership with a town in Scotland called, wait for it, Dull. Boring and Dull became a transatlantic sister city union, later joined by Bland, Australia, to form the Trinity of Tedium. It was meant as a joke, a marketing ploy, but it worked. The towns leaned so hard into their lack of sparkle that they became something unforgettable. Boring teaches us a valuable lesson. When life hands you monotony, brand it, trademark it, turn it into a pun. In the grand theater of American absurdity, nothing is off limits. Not even Pepsi's promise of a fighter jet. A Michigan man once sued Pepsi because he didn't win the Harrier jet promised in a parody commercial. It was the 90s. Pepsi ran an ad. A snarky, over-the-top commercial about Pepsi points, where you could collect bottle caps and trade them for branded gear. Hats, t-shirts, jackets. But then came the punchline. For 7 million points, you could get a Harrier jet. A real one. Vertical takeoff, military grade. Basically a flying war machine. Most people laughed. But one man in Michigan didn't. He did the math. If points could be bought, the jet could be earned. And he raised the funds, about $700,000, then sent Pepsi a check and requested his aircraft. Because this is America, and if you can buy it, it's legally yours, right? Pepsi said no. The lawsuit began. The man argued the ad was a contractual offer. Pepsi countered that it was clearly a joke. The court agreed with Pepsi, but not before everyone involved had to sit in a room and discuss whether promising a combat jet for soda points constituted legal fraud or just bad comedy. What started as satire became a courtroom drama, exposing the thin line between marketing hyperbole and literal interpretation, a line America crosses daily. And speaking of questionable math, there's a law in Indiana that once tried to redefine pi as 3.2. In 1897, the Indiana State Legislature, with full confidence and zero irony, tried to legally redefine pi. Not just estimate it, not just simplify it, redefine it. As in, declare by law that pi equals 3.2, because apparently circles obey the rule of law. The whole thing started with a math enthusiast who believed he had discovered a better, more rational way to square the circle, an ancient, impossible problem. He brought his solution to the Indiana House of Representatives, and rather than laugh him out of the building, they passed the bill unanimously. It only failed in the Senate because a visiting professor happened to be there and politely explained, "You can't legislate geometry." The senators, perhaps realizing they were on the verge of becoming the national joke of the century, quietly let the bill die. But it was close, dangerously close. For a brief moment, Indiana almost became the state where math bowed to government decree. And isn't that the most American thing ever? If the laws of the universe are inconvenient, we'll just pass our own. Next up, we meet a president who brought a literal wheel of cheese into the White House. And that's somehow not the strangest part. Andrew Jackson had a giant wheel of cheese in the White House and let guests carve off slices. It's 1837. The carpets of the White House are soaked. The furniture smells like a deli counter. And President Andrew Jackson is throwing one of the weirdest open houses in American history. All thanks to a 400-pound wheel of cheese. This wasn't just a quirky snack choice. It was a spectacle. Jackson had received the cheese as a gift years earlier. A monstrous dairy disc from a New York cheesemaker trying to impress the commander-in-chief. Jackson, ever the populist and never one to waste a publicity stunt, let it sit in the White House for 2 years. 2 years. By the time he decided to serve it, it had absorbed the essence of democracy, wallpaper, and probably a few regrets. On the day of his farewell reception, he opened the White House doors and invited the public to come slice off a piece. Thousands showed up. They ate, they shoved. They pocketed chunks like holy relics. People reported slipping on cheese grease. Staffers gagged. The smell lingered for months, some say years. Jackson's successor, Martin Van Buren, spent much of his early presidency trying to banish the odor of old cheddar from the halls of power. This wasn't just a party, it was performance. Jackson wanted to show he was a man of the people, that the White House belonged to the masses, and if the people wanted cheese, they'd get all the cheese. But if you think that's the wildest fast food-related meltdown in American history, brace yourself. A woman once called 911 because her sandwich had the wrong sauce. A woman once called 911 because her sandwich was made with the wrong sauce at Subway. 911 dispatchers have heard it all. Heart attacks, car crashes, burglaries in progress. And then, somewhere on the long list of societal unravelings, came a call from a woman who was furious at her sandwich. Not spoiled, not poisoned, just sauced. Incorrectly. She had gone to Subway, ordered her usual, and when the sandwich artist, a term that really stretches under this pressure, got the sauce wrong, she didn't ask for a correction or speak to a manager. She called emergency services, because in that moment, condiment mishandling was not an inconvenience. It was a crisis. This wasn't a prank. She was deadly serious, angry, demanding the police intervene. And someone somewhere had to write that report, had to explain in cold bureaucratic language that the alleged offense was a mayo mix-up. Imagine being the officer dispatched to investigate sandwich misapplication. Imagine walking into a Subway and having to say, "Ma'am, this isn't what 911 is for." But that's America, where emergency services are sometimes treated like Yelp with a badge. The real tragedy? Somewhere, a dispatcher missed a real emergency because this woman needed emotional triage over vinaigrette. And if you think sandwich outrage is as absurd as it gets, welcome to Texas, where the town name Cut and Shoot isn't a threat. It's an invitation. A Texas town is called Cut and Shoot. Drive north of Houston, and you'll find a quiet little town with a name that sounds like the final chapter of a Clint Eastwood movie. Cut and Shoot, Texas. It's not a metaphor. It's not satire. That's the legal name on the welcome sign, the government paperwork, and probably the high school yearbook. And no, it wasn't named after a violent crime. It was named after the threat of one. According to local legend, there was a dispute in 1912, something about a preacher, church property, or possibly both. The details are hazy, but tensions were high, and a young boy reportedly declared that he was going to cut around the corner and shoot through the bushes to escape the commotion. The phrase stuck. Somehow, instead of de-escalating the situation, the town immortalized it in municipal ink. There's something absurdly poetic about it. A place born of petty squabbling and half-serious threats, deciding to etch that mood into stone forever. It's almost honest. America has long confused bravado with branding. Today, Cut and Shoot is a sleepy suburb. Churches, gas stations, and a few thousand residents who have to explain their address every time they give it. But buried in that name is a perfect little American contradiction. A town with the soul of a gunslinger and the day-to-day rhythm of suburbia. And speaking of things that seem normal until you learn they're felonies, let's talk about how sharing your Netflix password once became a criminal offense. A Tennessee law made it illegal to share Netflix passwords. Imagine you're on the couch, snacks ready, blanket secured. You've just texted your cousin the password to your Netflix account, and suddenly you're a criminal. In Tennessee anyway. In 2011, the state passed a law, not a joke, not a metaphor, an actual statute, that made it illegal to share login credentials for streaming services. The stated goal was to combat piracy. The real-world effect? Turning casual password sharing into a potential misdemeanor. If you gave your college roommate your Netflix info, you weren't just generous. You were aiding and abetting. Of course, enforcement was minimal. No one stormed dorm rooms with battering rams yelling, "Put the remote down!" But the principle was there. Lawmakers had declared war on account freeloaders, the moochers of the digital age, stealing sitcoms one stream at a time. The irony is delicious. In a state where you can buy guns at Walmart and attend church in a strip mall, watching Stranger Things under your cousin's account became a legal gray area. It's a modern parable. In the fight for moral decency, nothing is too small to criminalize, especially if it involves other people enjoying things for free. But if you think stolen streaming is absurd, wait until you hear about the time a bullet to the chest didn't stop a speech. Teddy Roosevelt was shot mid-speech and finished the entire 90-minute talk anyway. October 14, 1912. Teddy Roosevelt, former president and third-party candidate, steps out to deliver a campaign speech. A man in the crowd pulls a pistol and shoots him in the chest. Chaos erupts. Blood blooms across Roosevelt's shirt. Aides panic. Doctors urge immediate hospitalization. Teddy brushes them off like mosquitoes. He reaches into his coat and pulls out a folded speech, now pierced with a bullet hole and stained with blood. Then he steps up to the podium and proceeds to speak. For 90 minutes. The bullet, it turned out, had been slowed by the thick manuscript and his eyeglass case. It lodged in his chest, but didn't kill him. Most people would take that as a sign to lie down, maybe rethink their afternoon plans. Not Teddy. He opened with, "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose," and launched into policy points, barely flinching. It wasn't just bravado, it was branding. This was a man who boxed in the White House and once gave a speech titled "The Strenuous Life." Getting shot and finishing a lecture wasn't a detour. It was a marketing opportunity. But if that's peak toughness, the next story brings us back to earth, where a man wanted a refund on his air mattress because it tasted funny. A man in South Dakota returned an air mattress to Walmart, demanding a refund because it tasted funny. Consumer complaints come in all shapes and smells. But sometimes one stands alone, an Everest of absurdity towering above the customer service desk. This time, it happened in South Dakota, where a man returned an air mattress to Walmart. Not because it deflated, not because it leaked, but because it tasted funny. Let that settle in. This man had apparently, at some point, put the air mattress in his mouth, or at least enough of it to develop a flavor profile. Maybe it was a dare. Maybe he was curious. Maybe he mistook it for jerky. Whatever the case, the issue wasn't structural. It was culinary. He brought the mattress back, receipt in hand, face presumably serious, and told the employee it tasted weird. And in that moment, some poor Walmart associate had to engage with that sentence as if it were part of a job they once dreamed of. They had to fill out a return slip and figure out which department handles flavor complaints. What's remarkable isn't just the complaint itself, it's the confidence, the certainty that this was a valid consumer issue, that plastic seasoning was grounds for corporate intervention. But if you think edible airbeds are wild, you'll love what the U.S. once planned to drop over the Soviet Union in a Cold War psyop too ridiculous to believe. The U.S. once made a plan to drop enormous condoms labeled medium over Soviet territory to intimidate them. The Cold War wasn't just missiles and spies. It was also an endless parade of psychological warfare, bizarre countermeasures, and deeply insecure national flexing. Case in point, the U.S. government once considered a plan to drop giant condoms over the Soviet Union, labeled medium. Why? To convince the Soviets that American men were so, well, equipped, that even our average was monstrous. It wasn't just propaganda. It was demoralization strategy. The idea was to trigger Soviet anxiety, to make the Red Army question everything, including their own anatomy. Imagine being a Soviet soldier, patrolling the countryside and stumbling across an American parachute delivery containing a latex balloon big enough to tarp a tank, stamped with the word medium. That's not warfare. That's psychological vandalism. The plan was never executed, presumably because someone in the Pentagon finally said, maybe this is a bit much. But the fact that it made it far enough to be written down, budgeted, and debated tells you everything about how seriously the U.S. took its propaganda. We were willing to weaponize sexual insecurity to win the Cold War. And if you think that's ridiculous, just remember, someone once sued a coffee company because the coffee was too hot. A woman sued Starbucks because her coffee was too hot. She won millions. At first glance, it sounds like satire. Woman spills coffee, sues coffee company, wins millions. It became a punchline, a symbol of litigious America. But like many punchlines, the truth is more grotesque than the joke. The incident didn't actually involve Starbucks. It was McDonald's. But the Starbucks myth persists because people love the narrative. Still, there was a real case where a woman burned herself on a hot beverage and sued for damages. And unlike what the headlines suggest, the injuries weren't mild. We're talking third-degree burns, skin grafts, permanent damage. What followed was a legal firestorm. Some saw it as justice, others as opportunism. The courts awarded her millions in punitive damages, not just for the burn, but because the company had knowingly kept their coffee at dangerous temperatures despite numerous complaints. Suddenly, it wasn't just about coffee. It was about negligence, accountability, and the line between reasonable risk and corporate recklessness. But none of that stopped the story from becoming urban legend. Too hot to drink, too rich to ignore. It lives on as a shorthand for frivolous lawsuits. Proof that public perception cares less about facts and more about punchlines. And speaking of things too hot to handle, there's a town in Idaho with fewer than 30 people, but a name that sounds like it should glow in the dark. There's a town in Idaho named Atomic City with fewer than 30 people. Blink and you'll miss it. A flat stretch of road, a couple of structures, and a sign that reads Atomic City, Idaho. It sounds like the setting of a science fiction novella or a Fallout side quest. In reality, it's a town with fewer than 30 residents, a ghost of a future that never arrived. Atomic City earned its name from its proximity to one of the country's first nuclear research facilities. Back in the 1950s, atomic power was all the rage, seen as the glamorous, unstoppable force that would define modern life. So towns like this one hitched their identity to it, hoping to ride the radioactive wave into technological utopia. But the promise faded. Funding dried up. And as the glow of atomic optimism dimmed, so did the town. Now, it's more irony than aspiration. A place named for unstoppable energy that mostly hosts tumbleweeds and regrets. It stands as a time capsule of mid-century hubris, where science and branding collided in a way only America could manage. Atomic City, population 29, optimism 0. And from radioactive optimism to paranoid incompetence, let's revisit a president who claimed he didn't know how to use a tape recorder during a national scandal. Richard Nixon once claimed he didn't know how to use a tape recorder in the Watergate hearings. When the presidency of Richard Nixon finally unraveled into the slow, sour collapse we now call Watergate, one of the strangest twists wasn't the spying, the cover-ups, or even the resignation. It was the moment the President of the United States, one of the most calculating and paranoid men to ever sit in the Oval Office, claimed under oath that he simply didn't know how to use a tape recorder. The excuse arrived wrapped in wide eyes and feigned innocence. The machine? Oh, that thing? No idea how it works. It was like watching a magician caught in the act, dropping his wand and declaring, "What rabbit?" The man who ran a surveillance-heavy White House, whose team orchestrated one of the most complex political spy games in American history, suddenly became a grandpa staring at a microwave, hoping it turns into a television. This wasn't just denial. It was strategic stupidity, weaponized incompetence. Nixon gambled that pretending to be technologically inept was more palatable than being caught red-handed. And for a moment, it almost worked. But history had other plans. The tapes existed. The gaps were damning. The irony? The device that supposedly confused him was the very tool that preserved his downfall. A machine he swore he didn't understand managed to record the exact reasons why we'd remember him forever. And if you thought tossing out excuses was ridiculous, wait until a man in Florida threw a live alligator into a drive-thru window. For real, a man in Florida once used a live alligator as a weapon in a drive-thru dispute. Fast food rage is an American staple, a genre of its own. But only Florida, in all its humid madness, could elevate it to this level of reptilian warfare. Picture it. A man in a drive-thru, angry at his order, reaches into his truck, grabs a live alligator, yes, a real living gator, and hurls it through the window. The weapon of choice was not a metaphor. It had teeth. It thrashed. It was, according to reports, about 3 feet long, which means it wasn't just a prop. It was a living prehistoric missile, flung in frustration because ketchup packets or chicken tenders didn't meet expectations. You have to admire the logistics. First, he had to have a gator. Then he had to keep it in his vehicle, like a glove box sidekick. Then he had to make the decision that this was the moment to unleash reptilian justice on a minimum wage employee. The gator was later recovered and released unharmed. The man, not so much. Charges were filed, questions were asked. Florida remained Florida. But while most fast food freakouts end in a tantrum, this one ended in zoological assault. And compared to the next story, where sliced bread became a threat to national security, it almost seems rational. The U.S. once banned sliced bread during World War II to save wax paper. In 1943, as World War II raged and rationing gripped the nation, the U.S. government made a bold, baffling move. It banned sliced bread, not because it was unhealthy, not because it was foreign, but because slicing bread, they argued, consumed too much wax paper. Yes, wax paper, the kind that wrapped your precious pre-sliced loaf to keep it fresh. It was a matter of wartime conservation, they claimed. By outlawing sliced loaves, they'd save packaging materials, because people would have to slice their own bread, which apparently made it last longer, or something like that. The logic was flimsy, the backlash immediate. Americans, already dealing with food stamps and gasoline limits, were now being told that they couldn't have the convenience of uniformly sliced bread. Headlines exploded. Angry letters flooded the government. One woman famously complained that her family of 5 had gone through an entire loaf trying to cut even slices, which sounds both plausible and poetically American. The ban lasted all of 8 weeks before the government caved. Sliced bread returned, and with it, national morale. It remains one of the most delightfully idiotic wartime policies ever enacted. Proof that even in crisis, bureaucracy never forgets how to be needlessly creative. And speaking of misguided ingenuity, the next man thought lemon juice would make him invisible to cameras. Spoiler, it didn't. A Pennsylvania man attempted to rob a bank with lemon juice on his face, thinking it would make him invisible to cameras. This story feels like it was written by the gods of Darwin Awards. A man in Pennsylvania attempted to rob a bank in broad daylight. No mask, no disguise, just confidence and lemon juice. Why lemon juice? Because he believed it would make him invisible to security cameras. Not figuratively invisible, literally invisible. Like he was casting some kind of acidic Harry Potter cloak over his face. He had read, or misread, that lemon juice could be used as invisible ink. So he made the Olympic leap in logic. If lemon juice can hide words on paper, surely it could hide my entire face from surveillance technology. He smeared it all over like sunscreen, walked into the bank, and demanded money. Naturally, the cameras captured him in full lemon-soaked glory. He was caught almost immediately. When police showed him the footage, he was reportedly confused, shocked that the magic potion of citrus and wishful thinking hadn't worked. He truly believed his science. This isn't just dumb. It's a perfect parable of American optimism. If you believe hard enough, anything is possible. Even chemical invisibility from $89 security cameras. And yet, compared to what comes next, his plan might actually be one of the more grounded choices, because the next town is named Toad Suck. Toad Suck is a real town in Arkansas. You might think it's a typo, or a southern euphemism, or some kind of bizarre Appalachian insult. But no, Toad Suck is real. A town in Arkansas with signs, maps, and residents who have to explain this every time they give someone their mailing address. The origins of the name are murky, as all the best ones are. Some claim it comes from steamboat-era lore, when idle deckhands waiting for river levels to rise would loiter near taverns and, as the saying goes, suck on the bottle till they swell up like toads. Others say it refers to a local landing spot where the frogs were so loud they seemed to be doing the sucking. Neither explanation makes it better, but Toad Suck embraced its curse. It hosts Toad Suck Days, a festival so committed to its amphibious branding that it includes frog-jumping contests, toad-themed merch, and musical performances that echo off the sticky walls of summertime absurdity. It's a shining example of America's ability to turn embarrassment into tradition. In Toad Suck, what should be a punchline becomes community pride. And pride, apparently, doesn't require dignity. Just a decent mascot and a bounce house. But if that name seems hard to live with, wait until you hear about the state where whistling underwater isn't just difficult, it's illegal. In West Virginia, it's illegal to whistle underwater. Let's just start with the obvious. How? Whistling underwater is about as likely as lighting a match in a hurricane. It's physically improbable, acoustically absurd, and functionally useless. Yet in West Virginia, someone felt compelled, at some point in the past, to ban it. This isn't parody. It's law, which means someone, a lawmaker, a committee, perhaps even a quorum, sat down and decided that submerged whistling was such a menace to society that it needed legal boundaries. Now we could try to imagine the origin. Maybe it was meant to discourage disruptive behavior in swimming pools. Maybe someone misunderstood a prank. Maybe one rogue whistler caused a lifeguard scandal so scandalous it echoed through legislative history. Or maybe, more likely, someone just wanted to flex their power over nonsense. Regardless, it exists. And it speaks to something deeper. America's love of rules for things no one is doing. We're a nation where common sense is too chaotic, so we try to plug every hole with paperwork, even if that means regulating the acoustics of human mouths underwater. Next time you're in a pool in West Virginia, remember, whistle and you're a rebel. Blow bubbles in C major, and you're probably on a watch list. And yet, compared to the customer who returned a vacuum because it didn't suck enough, that law might be the more grounded one. A customer once returned a vacuum cleaner to Target because it didn't suck enough. Some complaints are valid. Others are poetic. This one was both, and also a masterclass in unintentional irony. A customer walked into Target, wheeling a recently purchased vacuum cleaner, demanding a refund. Not because it was broken, not because it smelled like despair, but because, in their words, it didn't suck enough. Now, that's either the world's most accurate product review or the saddest one-liner ever filed with customer service. And the real tragedy? The vacuum probably did work. But in this customer's mind, it didn't provide that aggressive, soul-evacuating suction you get from industrial carpet demolition gear. This thing probably hummed politely when it should have roared like a jet engine. The poor employee behind the counter had to process this complaint with a straight face, had to look this person in the eye and try to parse whether they were talking about suction strength or existential disappointment. Didn't suck enough is vague, bold, and deeply American. A complaint that sounds like performance art, written in the language of Yelp-fueled consumer vengeance. And yet, this refund request is almost charming when you compare it to what was happening at the White House during the Reagan years, where astrology made its way into national scheduling. Ronald Reagan consulted an astrologer for White House scheduling. Yes, the leader of the free world, the man with his finger on the nuclear button, the guy who charmed global powers with cowboy aphorisms and Cold War grit, was partially operating under the influence of the stars. Not stars as in Hollywood icons, stars as in literal constellations, astrological charts, celestial vibes. It started after the 1981 assassination attempt on Reagan. His wife, Nancy, spooked and desperate for control, turned to an astrologer named Joan Quigley. And just like that, horoscopes became statecraft. She wasn't just giving casual advice. She was helping schedule presidential events, deciding when Reagan should speak, travel, or sign anything important, based on Mercury's mood and whether Saturn was feeling cooperative. And the kicker? No one really knew. This wasn't a press release. This was secret zodiac diplomacy. Advisors found out when calendars started shifting mysteriously, as if the government itself had developed a fear of Tuesdays with retrogrades. This wasn't ancient Rome. This was 1980s Washington. While world leaders debated arms treaties, America was asking the stars if it was a good day to meet Gorbachev. And yet somehow, that makes more sense than the next lawsuit. From a woman who sued a theme park because she didn't get wet enough on a water ride. A woman in California sued a theme park because she didn't get wet enough on a water ride. It's hard to imagine a more metaphorical lawsuit. A woman in California boarded a water ride, the kind that promises splashes, thrills, and at least one camera photo where someone's grandma is screaming, and emerged tragically, insufficiently drenched. The horror. Her complaint? The ride failed to deliver on its promise. She was not wet enough. As in, she went through all the drops, dips, and geysers and left with barely a mist. This, she claimed, was misleading. She wanted her money back, and she wanted someone held accountable for the crime of dryness. Now, one could argue that she had a point. If you sign up for a splash zone and leave bone dry, maybe something has gone wrong. But also, it's a theme park. Controlled chaos. Half the rides break down. The other half are operated by teenagers with one foot in reality and the other in daydreams. There are no guarantees, just the illusion of precision held together with gum, duct tape, and brand loyalty. Still, she filed the suit, which means a court had to examine whether partial dampness constitutes fraud. Somewhere, a lawyer had to say the words, "Your Honor, my client expected soaking and received only spritzing." If water ride disappointment sounds petty, the next story might feel stranger, because it involves the U.S. Navy and goats. For science, the U.S. Navy once used goats to test submarine escape hatches. Somewhere deep in the bureaucratic trenches of military research, a decision was made that feels like the plot of a rejected sci-fi pilot. The U.S. Navy, tasked with maintaining national security beneath the waves, needed to test the pressure resistance of submarine escape hatches. But instead of using sensors, dummies, or even test divers, they turned to goats, real ones, bleeding, hoofed, and presumably very confused. Why goats? Because goats, apparently, have lung capacities and respiratory responses that vaguely mimic those of humans under pressure. So naturally, the military logic followed. If the goat survives, the hatch is safe. The goats were strapped into little chairs, placed in pressure chambers, and subjected to simulated underwater emergencies. To their credit, the Navy did monitor the goats carefully and even tried to minimize harm. But still, this wasn't some backwoods stunt. This was funded, researched, and executed by trained professionals. The escape systems you trust with your life if your submarine implodes? Tested on a barnyard animal who didn't sign any waivers. It's the kind of military absurdity that seems too strange to be true. But it's all real. War science often walks the line between genius and cartoon villainy. And if you think goats and pressurized tubes are the weirdest thing to come out of Kentucky, wait until you visit a town named Monkey's Eyebrow. Monkey's Eyebrow is a town in Kentucky. There are place names that evoke poetry, history, or grandeur. Then there's Monkey's Eyebrow, Kentucky, a name that sounds like it was created by a drunk cartographer, playing Mad Libs. Nestled in Ballard County, it's not a big town, not even medium. Just a modest blip on the map with a name that prompts immediate disbelief, followed by reluctant Googling. The origin stories vary, and none of them help. One theory is that the town, when viewed from a nearby ridge, resembled a monkey's face, and this specific area looked like, well, its eyebrow. Another version involves some combination of moonshine, poor judgment, and a punchline that spiraled into permanence. What's certain is this: the residents have embraced it. There's signage, merch, and more pride than you'd expect from a place named after simian facial features. People drive miles just to take pictures next to the welcome sign. Monkey's eyebrow isn't ashamed. It's defiant. It knows it sounds ridiculous and doesn't care. In fact, it kind of thrives on it. Because in America, the weirder the name, the better the story. And just down the weird highway, an Arizona man tried to return a snake because it gave him bad vibes. An Arizona man was arrested for stealing a snake and then returning it because it gave bad vibes. Some thefts are impulsive. Others are strategic. But this one was spiritual. An Arizona man walked into a pet store, stole a snake. Yes, live, hissing, muscular, stuffed it in his clothing, and walked out. So far, it's a Florida-level crime. But then things took a turn. He returned it, voluntarily. Why? Because in his words, the snake gave bad vibes. That's it. That was the defense. Not fear, not guilt. Just an energetic mismatch. The snake and the man, apparently, were cosmically incompatible. Maybe it looked at him funny. Maybe it whispered the secrets of the void. Whatever the case, he felt the energy was off and decided to end the relationship. Unfortunately for him, karma works faster than vibe checks. Security cameras had captured everything. Authorities showed up, and he was arrested shortly after his metaphysical refund attempt. The snake, unharmed, was returned to its glass cube of judgment. But the story lingers, slithering around the edges of reason. Because only in America can you steal a reptile, cite emotional discomfort, and still end up in handcuffs. Not for the theft, but for misreading the serpent's aura. And speaking of emotional discomfort, let's talk about the legal consequences of flatulence after 6 p.m. in Florida. In Florida, it's illegal to fart in a public place after 6 p.m. on Thursdays. Leave it to Florida, America's undisputed champion of legislative eccentricity, to criminalize an act both universal and, let's face it, inevitable. Yes, in the legal archives of the Sunshine State, there exists a statute, or at least the urban legend of one, that makes it illegal to fart in public after 6 p.m. on Thursdays. Not during a church service, not at a dinner party, just in public, just on a Thursday, just after 6. The origins are hazy, possibly rooted in some forgotten local ordinance designed to uphold Victorian sensibilities or appease town hall meetings full of pearl clutchers. But regardless of how it started, the spirit of the law is pure, fragrant absurdity. You can commit all manner of socially repugnant acts throughout the week, but come Thursday evening, your body better behave like it's on a monastery retreat. Imagine the enforcement. A patrol car rolls slowly through the park, ears perked, nostrils flared. A citation pad is ready. Somewhere, a teenager panics, clenching heroically. This is how civilizations collapse. Not with a bang, but with a poorly timed burrito. And yet, as silly as it seems, it's somehow less bizarre than what happened in Oregon, where a man broke into a home not to rob it, but to cook pancakes. A man in Oregon once broke into a home and made pancakes, then politely left. In a world where home invasions tend to end in trauma and felony charges, this one came seasoned with cinnamon and quiet confusion. A man in Oregon broke into a house, no forced entry, no violence, and made himself at home, specifically in the kitchen. He found pancake mix, a skillet, maybe some syrup, and then he cooked, calmly, thoughtfully, like a man who knew this house better than its owners did. When the residents came home, they found dirty dishes, a warm griddle, and what one might call a domestic disturbance of brunch. But no thief, no harm, just a stranger who had wandered into their lives like a breakfast-themed ghost and disappeared before the first bite. The police found him shortly after, not hiding, not running, just existing. When asked why he did it, He gave the only answer that made sense in a story that didn't. He was hungry. This wasn't a crime of greed. It was a crime of carbohydrates. And while charges were filed, even the law seemed baffled, as if unsure whether to punish the man or thank him for not stealing the silverware. And if you thought that trespasser was oddly principled, wait until you hear about President James Buchanan, who literally bought slaves just so he could free them. James Buchanan bought slaves with his own money, only to free them and appear noble. James Buchanan, the man historians frequently rank among the worst U.S. presidents, had a personal morality play he liked to stage for the public, a one-man abolitionist theater with a suspicious price tag. You see, Buchanan didn't believe in slavery, not publicly, not loudly, but privately he bought enslaved people, and then, very publicly, freed them. On paper, that made him a noble man, a liberator, a beacon of compassion in a divided nation. But the optics unravel on closer inspection. He didn't do it out of necessity. He wasn't rescuing people from bondage. He was purchasing them with the full knowledge that the act of buying reinforced the system he claimed to oppose. It was moral laundering, using wealth to simulate decency while silently upholding the very thing he pretended to dismantle. It's a move so classically American, it could be taught in civics class. Exploit a system just long enough to benefit from its collapse. Buchanan played both sides, and as usual, history remembers the performance, not the mechanics. And that brings us, appropriately, to a state where performance is everything. California, where even your outfit behind the wheel can become a criminal act, especially if it involves a housecoat. In California, it's illegal for a woman to drive while wearing a housecoat. California, the land of freedom, fashion, and freeway gridlock. But buried somewhere in the Golden State's sprawling tangle of outdated laws is one that seems designed by a particularly cranky time traveler. It's illegal for a woman to drive a car while wearing a housecoat, not a hazmat suit, not a suit of armor. Just a cozy terry cloth robe typically worn between the shower and "don't talk to me yet." The law's origins are unclear. Likely a leftover from a time when decency codes and patriarchal paranoia dictated public behavior. Maybe it was about safety. Maybe it was about image. Or maybe someone in the 1940s saw a woman in a bathrobe behind the wheel and wrote an angry letter to their congressman while clutching a martini and muttering about the decline of civilization. Regardless, the law remains, at least on the books. Enforcement is another matter. No one's pulling over a minivan because it's being piloted by someone in fleece and curlers. But the fact that the state ever thought this was worth legislating tells you everything about how deeply Americans fear comfort when it's female and mobile. And if that sounds like a weird wartime holdover, just wait for the next one, where America literally strapped bombs to bats. The U.S. once used bat bombs, literally strapping incendiaries to bats and releasing them. Yes, you read that right. During World War II, the United States government, armed with scientists, engineers, and a seemingly bottomless imagination for destruction, came up with a plan that sounds like it was pitched by a sleep-deprived comic book villain: bat bombs. The plan was to attach tiny incendiary devices to actual bats, load them into canisters, and drop them over Japanese cities. The bats would scatter, roost inside wooden buildings, and, at a set time, ignite. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't rejected. This was funded, tested, developed. Hundreds of bats were recruited, fitted with miniature napalm packs, and subjected to field trials. And yes, a few test runs went terribly wrong, including one where the bats escaped early and burned down parts of the military base. The entire idea hinged on the bat's natural instincts. Let nature do the work, said the humans. Let gravity and echolocation become weapons of war. It was eco-terrorism before that phrase had a name. Eventually, the project was scrapped in favor of more, shall we say, efficient methods of destruction. But for a brief, flaming moment in history, America tried to weaponize animals with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for Bond villains. And speaking of death and buyer's remorse, The next guy returned a coffin to Walmart because, as it turns out, the person it was intended for didn't end up needing it. A man once returned a used coffin to Walmart because the person didn't end up needing it. Here lies the greatest refund in American consumer history. A man who returned a coffin to Walmart. Not because it was defective, not because it didn't match the drapes, but because, and this was his official reasoning, the person didn't end up needing it. That's right, the intended user, presumably a loved one, was either resurrected, relocated, or miraculously improved. The image is astounding. A man wheeling a coffin through the automatic doors of a Walmart, dodging shoppers with carts full of frozen peas and off-brand detergent, heading for the customer service counter with a product that literally screams final sale. And yet, the return was processed. No one asked the follow-up question. Who was the coffin for? Why didn't they need it? Did they cancel their death? Did they upgrade to cremation? Did someone just change their mind mid-funeral and walk out? The ambiguity is haunting and hilarious. But what makes it unforgettable is the casual way Walmart handled it, as if returning the vessel of eternal rest was just another Tuesday. And if you think that's ridiculous, just wait until Ohio outlaws whale fishing, in a state with zero coastline. In Ohio, it's illegal to fish for whales. In Ohio, let's take a moment to picture the scene. You're standing on the muddy banks of a river in landlocked Ohio, holding a fishing rod, staring into the shallow water, waiting for a blue whale to surface. You've packed snacks, maybe brought a friend. You're in violation of the law. Yes, somewhere in the state legislature, someone wrote, and someone else approved, a law making it illegal to fish for whales in Ohio. That's not just unnecessary. That's surreal. Because Ohio, for those geographically unacquainted, is about as ocean-adjacent as the moon. The closest beach is a state of mind. It raises several uncomfortable possibilities. 1. Lawmakers didn't know whales live in oceans. 2. Someone tried, and they felt the need to proactively stop them. Or 3. Legislative boredom is a powerful, dangerous thing. The best part? The law exists on paper like a joke that got too far out of hand. A monument to the American tradition of preemptive overkill. No whale has ever been caught. No harpoons have ever been confiscated. And yet the rule remains, guarding Ohio's rivers from an invasion that evolution already took care of. If you think that's a ridiculous name for legislation, meet the next town, proudly perched on the edge of innuendo, called Climax. A town in Georgia is named Climax. Just south of the Georgia-Florida border sits a quiet little place with one of the most blushingly inappropriate names in America. Climax. Population small, name not. It's the kind of place where every sign reads like the punchline of a very specific joke, and every road trip detour suddenly feels like a dare. But it's not a gimmick. The name is historical, apparently derived from the town's location at the highest point of the railroad line between Savannah and the Chattahoochee River. A literal climax, geographically speaking. Unfortunately, the English language evolved in the meantime. Today, Climax leans into the joke, because what choice do you have when your welcome sign causes giggles, and your high school sports teams have to compete with Climax stitched on their uniforms? It's a masterclass in ironic branding. A town too small to escape attention, too proud to change. They've got a post office, a few churches, and a Climax community club that somehow isn't a dating app. The name alone ensures immortality, or at least a steady stream of road sign thieves. And if you think that's the weirdest customer complaint that ever existed, how about someone asking for a refund because their Christmas lights didn't make the house look festive enough? A customer once asked a store to refund their Christmas lights because they didn't make the house look festive enough. Of all the petty returns in consumer history, and America has millions, few are as existentially absurd as this one. A customer bought Christmas lights, hung them up, stood outside, stared at their house, and felt nothing. No sparkle, no magic, no peppermint-scented nostalgia, just a vague emotional void. So naturally, they returned the lights. The complaint wasn't that they were broken, not the wrong color, not tangled beyond recognition like the national tradition demands. No. The problem was that they failed to evoke the Christmas spirit. That's right. Someone tried to return merchandise based on an emotional shortfall. Imagine the employee trying to process that. So the lights work. Yes. You use them? Yes. They just didn't inspire joy? Correct. Refund, please. This is late-stage capitalism wrapped in tinsel, expecting emotion from electronics and punishing them when they fall short. It's not just a product failure. It's a personal betrayal. The lights had one job, to sparkle their way into this person's cold, suburban heart, and they blew it. And yet, as dumb as that sounds, it's somehow less delusional than the next presidential quote. "I am not a crook," said the crook, just before everything fell apart. Richard Nixon once claimed he was not a crook while being a crook. It's one of the most infamous lines in American political theater. 4 words that now read like the prelude to a guilty verdict. "I am not a crook." Richard Nixon said it on live television in 1973, standing stiffly behind a podium in Florida, his jowls clenched and voice vibrating with the awkward self-righteousness of a man who absolutely was. The phrase didn't exonerate him. It branded him. Forever. The line was meant to distance him from the ever-growing Watergate scandal, to project strength and defiance. But instead, it became the cartoonishly ironic cherry on top of his collapsing presidency. He said it, America collectively raised an eyebrow, and then the tapes, those cursed, incriminating Nixon-recorded tapes, did the rest. What makes it so laughable isn't just the lie. It's the absolute confidence in the lie. He could have played it safe, could have ducked. But no, he wanted the headline. And he got it. History heard, "I am not a crook," and then watched as he resigned in disgrace 9 months later. A sweaty heap of paranoia and presidential tape hiss. And if you think that's the most infernal name drop in history, hold on to your horns. Because the next town is called Hell. Hell is a town in Michigan. Yes, there is a hell in America, and it's in Michigan. You can drive there, take a picture with the welcome sign, buy a go-to-hell postcard, and grab an ice cream cone that melts faster than moral resolve in Congress. It's not a metaphor. It's not a biblical theme park. It's a real place. And honestly, it's pretty delightful. The town leans into the name with hellish enthusiasm. Local businesses sell devil-themed merchandise. Couples get married there just for the jokes. And every October, Hell becomes a Halloween pilgrimage site for irony tourists. You can even become mayor of Hell for a day. Because of course you can. Why the name? Theories abound. One involves a German man who said the town looked so shun hell, meaning so beautifully bright. And someone took the hell part and ran with it. Another blames a sarcastic landowner who, tired of the state asking what to name the town, said, "Call it Hell for all I care." So they did. But while hell might be a cheerful punchline, the next story is pure tragedy. Of the taco kind. Because in Mississippi, a man once called 911 after Taco Bell ran out of taco shells. A man in Mississippi called 911 because Taco Bell ran out of taco shells. There are emergencies, and then there are emergencies you create in your own mind because you've confused emotional inconvenience with civic crisis. A man in Mississippi experienced the latter when he pulled up to Taco Bell, ordered his favorite meal, and was told, with polite corporate shame, that they were out of taco shells. Instead of switching to burritos, leaving quietly, or screaming into the void like the rest of us, he did what any sensible person with a wildly inflated sense of entitlement might do. He called 911. Not once, multiple times. Because in his mind, this wasn't a supply chain hiccup. It was a breakdown of civilization itself. Imagine the dispatcher on the other end, expecting reports of fires, break-ins, actual violence, and instead getting a full-throated report of a missing taco infrastructure. "They out of shells, ma'am." Again, no one was harmed, except for the officer's time and our collective dignity. The man was arrested for abusing emergency services, proving once again that nothing good happens when your dinner plans turn into a constitutional crisis. And if you thought this was peak fast food drama, get ready for the next level of presidential absurdity. Calvin Coolidge and his electronic horse saddle. Calvin Coolidge had an electronic horse saddle in the White House for exercise. If there was ever a president whose personality matched the energy of an electronic horse, it was Calvin Coolidge, nicknamed Silent Cal, because he famously avoided unnecessary words like they were political landmines. The man didn't just dislike small talk. He seemed allergic to animation of any kind, which makes his choice of exercise in the White House all the more spectacularly absurd. Coolidge had installed in the executive residence a mechanical horse. Not a treadmill, not a rowing machine. A saddle mounted on a hydraulic contraption that bucked and moved as if you were galloping across the prairies. Except you were in a suit, indoors, and probably trying not to spill your coffee. This contraption was designed to simulate horseback riding for cardiovascular fitness. But what it really simulated was America's eternal quest to do the absolute minimum physical exertion in the most complicated way possible. It was fitness for the elite, exercise stripped of all dignity, turned into a weird dance between absurdity and privilege. And there's just something poetic about imagining the President of the United States rocking back and forth on a robotic saddle, contemplating policy and trying not to dislocate something. But if you think a horse machine is weird, how about a whole town in Alabama that sounds like a failed barbecue experiment? Welcome to Burnt Corn. There's a town in Alabama called Burnt Corn. Welcome to Burnt Corn, Alabama. A real town, not an insult or a sad recipe. Tucked away in Monroe County, this place exists as both a geographic location and a deeply uncomfortable phrase. You can find it on maps, on road signs, and occasionally in jokes where someone needs a punchline that screams rural Southern cryptid energy. The name allegedly dates back to a skirmish between settlers and Creek Native Americans in the early 1800s, during which cornfields were burned. But that historical footnote doesn't stop the name from sounding like a tragedy in your microwave or the least appetizing Thanksgiving side dish. Today, Burnt Corn isn't exactly booming. It's a near ghost town with just enough structures and stories to qualify as a town rather than a memory. But the name lives on, stubbornly, hilariously, and unforgettably, making it a favorite among weird road trip bloggers and souvenir road sign thieves with low impulse control. It's another example of America's absolute refusal to rename things just because they sound ridiculous. And if you think towns with embarrassing names are bad, wait until you see what happens when a president tries to leave a press conference through a locked door. George W. Bush once tried to exit a press conference and accidentally walked into a locked door on live TV. There are gaffes, there are face palms, and then there are the moments so perfectly symbolic that history preserves them not just as bloopers, but as themes. Enter George W. Bush, mid-2000s, at a press conference in China. He finishes his remarks, gives a nod to the cameras, and strides confidently toward the nearest door, which, tragically, is locked. The cameras don't flinch. They catch every second of his increasingly awkward jig, the gentle rattle of the doorknob, the brief flicker of panic in his eyes, the slow pivot toward the opposite side of the room where an open door waits, somewhere presumably behind a curtain labeled Dignity, Exit Stage Left. In that moment, he wasn't the leader of the free world. He was all of us, trying to leave a party and pulling the door that says push. It was unintentional comedy, but also, in the deadpan rhythm of the Bush years, eerily fitting. A metaphor in khakis. The footage became instant meme fuel, a punchline that outlived the press conference by decades. And while it's not technically a crime, what did happen next in Vegas was a lawsuit involving $1 million and alleged hypnosis. A man sued a Las Vegas casino for hypnotizing him into losing $1 million. Las Vegas is a city built on poor decisions, where bright lights, free drinks, and pulsating slot machines combine into one endless suggestion that you're the lucky one. But one man, after losing a jaw-dropping $1 million at the tables, decided he wasn't just unlucky. He was a victim of psychological warfare. His claim? The casino had hypnotized him. That's right. In a court of law with a straight face, he argued that he was mentally manipulated, spellbound by the casino's lights, sounds, or possibly an evil blackjack dealer with Jedi mind powers. The lawsuit stated that he had been placed in a trance-like state and was therefore not responsible for the bets he made. Essentially, he tried to return gambling losses the way you return a toaster. It was the Hail Mary of legal defenses, part science fiction, part soap opera, all desperation. Unsurprisingly, the court didn't buy it. Because if hypnosis was truly that effective, Las Vegas wouldn't need advertising. They'd just mail out pendulums. The real magic wasn't in the trance. It was in how this man managed to spin financial ruin into a public trial. But if you think that's the strangest legal protection around, let's talk about a certain Sasquatch clause in the Pacific Northwest. In Washington, it's illegal to harass Bigfoot. Yes, this is a real thing. In Washington state, lush, misty, cryptid central Washington, it is illegal to harass, harm, or otherwise interfere with Bigfoot. Sasquatch, the mythical forest dweller whose fuzzy silhouette has haunted blurry photos and shaky camcorders for generations. And if you do find him, don't shoot, don't chase. And for the love of folklore, don't bother him. It's against the law. Some counties even went further and declared Bigfoot a protected species. They passed legislation as if the creature were not a conspiracy, but a misunderstood citizen of the woods. It's a law built on irony, caution, and a deep affection for local legend, and possibly a hedged bet, just in case someone does bag a blurry giant on their trail cam. It's equal parts joke and policy, an acknowledgement that belief, even without proof, shapes communities. Sasquatch may not be real, but the cultural need for him is. He's part tourist economy, part campfire morality tale, and now, legally speaking, part of the Washington ecosystem. And while that law protects the hypothetical, the next emergency is very real and very dumb. Because someone once called 911 over a bad haircut. A woman called 911 because she didn't like how her haircut turned out. Let's be clear, bad haircuts are traumatic. A botched bob or lopsided fringe can absolutely ruin your week, your self-esteem, and your Instagram presence. But are they life-threatening? Debatable. Are they a 911 level crisis? Absolutely not. Unless, of course, you're this woman who, upon receiving a haircut that did not meet her expectations, picked up the phone and dialed the number reserved for emergencies. Her complaint? That the hairstylist had butchered her hair, that justice must be served, and that only law enforcement could rectify this follicular tragedy. She didn't storm out. She didn't leave a bad Yelp review. She went straight to DEFCON 1. Imagine the dispatcher, sitting there, headset on, ready for gunshots or house fires, only to hear the words, "I need police, my bangs are uneven," and somewhere officers had to show up, had to stand in a salon surrounded by scissors and shame, and gently explain that hair crimes are not, in fact, crimes. The result? Probably a warning, maybe a citation. Definitely a story those officers tell at every barbecue for the rest of their careers. But if you thought that was embarrassing, just wait until you meet a place called Booger Hole. Yes, really. Booger Hole is a real place in West Virginia. Yes, Booger Hole, that's the name. A place so aggressively unappetizing that you almost expect it to be a typo. But it's not. It's a legitimate, cartographically certified community in Clay County, West Virginia. A name that sounds like a 6-year-old won a naming contest after a sugar rush and zero parental supervision. But Booger Hole's roots are darker than the name suggests. Booger, in Appalachian dialect, doesn't refer to nasal nuggets. It's derived from bogey, meaning ghost or monster. The legend goes that in the early 1900s, Booger Hole was plagued by mysterious disappearances and murders. Locals believed something evil stalked the area, and so they named the place after it. As one chilling sign reportedly said, "This is Booger Hole. Watch out. We shoot strangers." Now that's a welcome mat. Today, Booger Hole mostly survives as a punchline. The town's population is small, its mystique outsized, and its sign is one of the most stolen in West Virginia history. It's folklore in asphalt form, a place where superstition meets small-town stubbornness, refusing to change even when the rest of the country giggles. But the next story is less haunted, more horrifying, because Thomas Edison once electrocuted an elephant. Intentionally. Thomas Edison electrocuted an elephant to prove AC electricity was dangerous. In the late 19th century, America's electrical future was being decided in a brutal battle known as the War of the Currents. Thomas Edison, the champion of direct current, DC, was in a public relations war against Nikola Tesla's alternating current, AC. And in this war, Edison didn't just argue. He performed, with volts and victims. To prove how dangerous AC was, Edison began a campaign of gruesome public demonstrations, electrocuting animals with Tesla's preferred current. The most infamous? A 10,000-pound circus elephant named Topsy. Topsy had reportedly killed a handler, a man who'd burned her with a cigar and fed her lit cigarettes. The circus, looking for spectacle and closure, agreed to execute her publicly. Edison saw an opportunity. In 1903, at Luna Park in Coney Island, in front of a crowd of spectators, Topsy was fed carrots laced with cyanide, had electrodes strapped to her feet, and was killed by 6,600 volts of AC electricity. Edison filmed the whole thing. It wasn't just inhumane. It was marketing. Topsy became a literal symbol in a corporate smear campaign. Her death electrified for profit and propaganda. Edison proved his point, but history judged him for the stunt. And from cheese-fueled megamines to literal food fights, our next tale involves a man in Wisconsin arrested for hurling slices of cheese at his neighbor. A Wisconsin man was arrested after pelting his neighbor with cheese. Cheese is a cornerstone of Midwestern hospitality. It melts on burgers, crowns casseroles, and in Wisconsin, it's practically currency. But in this story, dairy took a darker turn, one that ended with a police report and a cheese-based assault charge. The tale begins, as so many strange American incidents do, with a neighborly dispute. Maybe it was about noise, maybe lawn care. Maybe the neighbor had just made one passive-aggressive comment too many. Whatever sparked the conflict, the response was sudden and lactose-laden. The man didn't yell. He didn't call a mediator. He weaponized his fridge, specifically slices of cheese, not thrown with the aimless flair of a prank, but launched with intent. Multiple slices, repeated volleys, each landing with a squish and a smell that said, "I have lost my patience and my dignity is optional." Police arrived, possibly stifling laughter, and arrested him for disorderly conduct. The cheese thrower didn't deny it. He stood by his dairy-based justice as if channeling the spirit of a deranged grilled cheese sandwich. And while no one was physically harmed, the event remains a testament to how quickly comfort food can turn confrontational. Up next, whiskey dogs and the state of Illinois. Things are about to get worse. It's illegal in Illinois to give a dog whiskey. America has always had a strange relationship with alcohol, from prohibition to frat parties to boxed wine in church basements. But sometimes, the line between weird and wild is drawn with a leash. In Illinois, it is explicitly illegal to give your dog whiskey. Not beer, not gin, whiskey. You can almost picture the scene that inspired this law. A tipsy farmer in overalls sharing a celebratory shot of bourbon with his golden retriever after a successful harvest. The dog, confused but loyal, licks from the glass and wobbles into legend. Unfortunately for Fido, the lawmakers weren't amused. So they made it illegal. Not ill-advised or don't do that, but a punishable offense. Somewhere, someone in the Illinois state legislature stood up, looked around the chamber, and declared, "We must protect our canines from Kentucky's finest." It's not the dogs were lining up for happy hour. It's that someone, probably more than one someone, made it a habit. And America, rather than saying maybe don't, reached for its favorite solution, legislation. Better a strange law on the books than another drunk dachshund in the ER. And if you think that's a strange traffic violation, wait until we revisit Ulysses S. Grant, the president who got a speeding ticket on a horse. Ulysses S. Grant got a speeding ticket on a horse, Washington, D.C., late 1800s. The streets are cobbled, the air is thick with cigar smoke and Civil War trauma, and President Ulysses S. Grant, war hero, victor of Appomattox, is out riding his horse, fast, too fast. Grant was known for his horsemanship. He loved riding, but on this particular day, he apparently loved it a little too much. Local police, enforcing what was then considered speed regulation for horse-drawn travel, stopped him and cited him for reckless riding. That's right. The sitting president of the United States was issued a speeding ticket for going full throttle on a stallion. The officer reportedly didn't recognize him at first. When he did, there was a pause. The kind of moment where constitutional crisis and common sense lock eyes and start dancing. But to Grant's credit, he didn't pull rank. He took the ticket. No tantrum, no Twitter rant. Though let's be honest, he would have dominated Civil War Twitter. This remains one of the most charmingly bizarre moments in presidential history. A reminder that even the most powerful man in the country wasn't above the law, at least when it came to reckless galloping. And now, from horsepower to monopoly money. Yes, monopoly. Someone tried to use it for bail. A woman once tried to pay her bail with monopoly money. The American bail system is many things: expensive, flawed, controversial, and occasionally the setting for theater-grade idiocy. Case in point, a woman facing real criminal charges stood before the justice system and attempted to post bail using currency from Monopoly. Yes, the pink and blue bills of Family Game Night were presented as legal tender for freedom. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't performance art. It was a genuine stone-faced attempt to pass off fake cash as a get-out-of-jail card, which ironically does exist in the game, but not in reality. She handed the bills over, perhaps hoping the bail clerk had a sense of humor or vision problems. The response? Not shock, not even anger, just weary disbelief. Because this is America, and someone somewhere is always trying to pay with monopoly money, usually at court, sometimes at fast food counters. The woman didn't go free. The monopoly bills were confiscated, and while jail remained her temporary address, she instantly moved into the eternal Hall of Fame for dumb legal defenses. And if you thought that was hellish, wait until we visit a real place in Massachusetts called, we kid you not, Satan's Kingdom. Satan's Kingdom is a town in Massachusetts. If you think the names Hell or Booger Hole are the peak of weird American geography, allow us to introduce the darkest, most metal-sounding hamlet in the Northeast. Satan's Kingdom, Massachusetts. That's not the name of a haunted house or a heavy metal album. It's a real place, with a real sign, that people really live near. And if you ask nicely, we'll give you directions to. How did it get that name? Local legend says early settlers found the land so treacherous, rocky, and agriculturally cursed that they figured only Satan himself could possibly own it. And in true Puritan fashion, instead of calling it something gentle like Devil's Glen or Unholy Knoll, they went with full-on Satan's Kingdom. No metaphors, no euphemisms, just Satan, ruling. Here. Today, the area is weirdly scenic, full of hiking trails, rivers, and families trying desperately to get mail without explaining their address every time. It's also the kind of place where your GPS says the name out loud, and everyone in the car stops chewing. But compared to the next entry on this list, Satan's Kingdom sounds downright reasonable, because the next guy robbed a store using a banana hidden in his shirt. A man in Texas robbed a store using a banana hidden in his shirt. Yes, a banana, as in the fruit. A man in Texas walked into a store, stuffed a banana into his shirt like it was a gun, pointed it at the cashier, and demanded money. The staff complied, because when adrenaline meets crime, all logic peels away. Was it a real gun? They couldn't be sure. And in the high-stakes world of minimum wage and maximum risk, nobody wants to bet their life on produce. So the drawer opened. Cash was handed over. The banana remained holstered. Crime, it seems, doesn't always require bullets. Sometimes it just requires poor impulse control and a lack of potassium deficiency. The man was later caught. Not because of the banana, which he ate, but because, like most dumb crimes, he didn't have a getaway plan beyond walk away quickly. The surveillance footage was clear. Suspect, medium build, armed with a Chiquita. He was charged with robbery and possibly awarded an honorary Darwin Medal in jail. The police didn't release whether the banana was ripe. But one thing is certain. This was one of the softest armed robberies in Texas history. And from tropical weapons to tropical diseases. Next up is Nebraska, where you can't get married if you have a venereal disease, because romance is conditional. There's a law in Nebraska that says you can't get married if you have a venereal disease. Nebraska, land of corn, quiet towns, and extremely judgmental marital policies. According to state law, you can't get married if you have a venereal disease. No exceptions, no workarounds. If you've got something communicable below the belt, the state is prepared to cancel your trip down the aisle. This law, like many on this list, likely hails from a time when medical science was questionable, shame was weaponized, and the word syphilis sent people running for pitchforks. Back then, diseases were seen less as public health issues and more as moral failings, the body's way of tattling on your lifestyle choices. But even today, in theory, the law remains. Which means technically, the state could nullify your marriage license if you test positive for an STD. Forget love. Forget devotion. The law says, get your penicillin, then get your certificate. Of course, no one's enforcing this. It's a fossilized law sitting in the books like a time capsule of old fears and outdated science. But its mere existence raises eyebrows and reminds us that, in the eyes of bureaucracy, even love needs a doctor's note. Next up, a man who broke into someone's home to clean it, and he left a thank you note. Because sure, why not? A guy once broke into a home, cleaned the house, and left a thank you note. Most break-ins involve shattered windows, stolen electronics, and emotional scars. But this one left behind a lemon-scented floor and a note of appreciation. A man in Massachusetts, either a benevolent vigilante, a confused housekeeper, or a criminal with a compulsion for tidiness, entered someone's home without permission and cleaned it thoroughly, then left a thank you note as if he'd just finished a polite Airbnb stay. The homeowners returned to find their floors vacuumed, their counters wiped down, and their belongings gently rearranged by a stranger with excellent Swiffer technique. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. Just tidied. In fact, some things were too clean, like the toilet, which had been scrubbed with a kind of vengeance usually reserved for guilty consciences or stepdad chore rotas. When police were contacted, they were baffled. The homeowner wasn't angry, just unsettled. "It's not my cleaning style," they said, which might be the most passive-aggressive reaction to free labor ever recorded. Eventually, it was speculated that the man had entered the wrong home, thinking it belonged to someone else. A mistaken address. A mix-up of morality. But still, he thanked them for the privilege. And if you think that's a weird way to say hello, wait until we visit Minnesota, where people live in a place called Embarrass. Embarrass is a real town in Minnesota. Tucked into the frosty northern regions of Minnesota lies a small town cursed with a name that sounds like an emotional breakdown in zip code form, Embarrass. And yes, that's its real, official, painfully ironic name. The name doesn't come from shame or regret, though you'd be forgiven for thinking so. It actually stems from the French word embarrass, meaning obstruction or hindrance, a reference to the treacherous rivers that once thwarted early explorers. But language evolved, and the town got stuck with a moniker that now sounds like the setup to a therapist's icebreaker exercise. Residents have learned to lean into the awkwardness. They sell "I got lost and embarrassed" bumper stickers. They field the jokes. They survive the occasional drive-by news headline. It's all part of the deal when your home sounds like a confession. Ironically, Embarrass is known for one thing that has nothing to do with feelings: cold. It's often the coldest place in the lower 48 states, regularly hitting temperatures so low that even penguins would file HR complaints. Embarrassed, cold, proud, and somehow still less humiliating than what happens when a Florida man tries to steal a vending machine. On foot. A Florida man tried to steal a vending machine. On foot. Florida man strikes again, this time with a plan so dumb, so brazen, it deserves its own cautionary billboard. In a feat of pure human audacity, a man attempted to steal a vending machine. Not with a truck, not with accomplices, just himself and his legs. Witnesses reported seeing the man dragging the vending machine, clanking, screeching, and bouncing down the sidewalk like a caffeinated snail. No disguise, no getaway vehicle. Just one man versus 800 pounds of poorly engineered metal and stale Doritos. His goal? Unclear. His method? Flawed. His pace? Glacial. Security footage showed him heaving the machine across a parking lot, occasionally stopping to breathe, or perhaps reconsider every choice that led him to this moment. The machine tipped, threatened to crush him, but he persisted. A true underdog story, if the dog were severely underqualified. He didn't make it far. Police arrived, confused but not surprised, because this was Florida, and the vending machine wasn't even unplugged. He was arrested on the spot, proving once again that petty crime is a full-contact sport, best left to those with upper body strength, wheels, or at least a basic understanding of mass. And speaking of unearned expectations, next up, a woman who demanded a refund for her lottery ticket because it wasn't lucky. A woman once demanded a refund for a lottery ticket because it wasn't lucky. There are levels to denial. And then there's this. A woman who bought a lottery ticket, scratched it, discovered, shockingly, that she didn't become a millionaire overnight, and marched straight back to the store demanding a refund. Her reason? The ticket wasn't lucky, not defective, not counterfeit, just insufficiently magical. You have to admire the purity of her logic. The transaction didn't fulfill her emotional expectations, so clearly the product was flawed. It's like returning a mirror because it didn't show you thinner, or demanding your horoscope be rewritten because it didn't predict your ex texting at 2 a.m. The clerk tried to explain the basic rules of probability, which was like trying to teach a brick about jazz. She was undeterred. She had paid money and received disappointment, and in her eyes, that was grounds for restitution. No refund was issued, no miracle occurred. But she left behind something arguably more valuable, a new benchmark for delusional entitlement. Because while most of us understand the lottery is a tax on hope, this woman believed she'd purchased a guaranteed reality and wanted her money back when fate didn't deliver. And if you think that's the most unnecessary law in America, hold on to your bananas. Because Massachusetts once outlawed gorillas riding in the back seat of cars. A law in Massachusetts forbids gorillas from riding in the back seat of a car. This isn't metaphor. This isn't satire. This is actual legislation. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it is illegal for a gorilla to ride in the back seat of a car. Front seat? Apparently fine. Trunk? Probably unwise, but technically not addressed. But the back seat? That's where society draws the line. You almost have to applaud the specificity. This wasn't a general no wild animals in cars law. It didn't target tigers or bears or even your neighbor's emotionally unstable parrot. No, it singled out gorillas, which begs the question, what happened? We don't know the incident that inspired this, but it had to be legendary. Picture a 1940s Buick pulling up to a red light. A gorilla sits in the back, arms crossed, staring down a traffic cop. Maybe it escaped a zoo. Maybe someone tried to drive it cross-country for a circus audition. Whatever the story, someone got scared, a law was drafted, and now Massachusetts has to live with it. It's outdated, unused, and hilarious, a monument to reactive governance. But don't worry, it gets even weirder. Up next is the town of Ding Dong, Texas, named by two men named Bell, obviously. A U.S. town was named Ding Dong by two men named Zulius Bell and Bert Bell. It sounds like the setup to a bad bar joke. Two men named Bell walk into Texas and name a town Ding Dong. But that's not a punchline. That's American history. Zulius and Bert Bell perhaps bored or visionary, or just whimsically unwell, named their settlement Ding Dong after themselves, literally. They hung a sign outside their store with 2 bells on it, one labeled Ding, the other Dong, and thus a legend was born. You'd think the name would doom the town to ridicule and abandonment, but Ding Dong still exists, proudly nestled in central Texas like the world's least serious GPS destination. It's unincorporated, small, and delightfully absurd. The name's become a roadside attraction in itself, luring travelers looking for the world's dumbest detour. Of course, the locals have learned to embrace it. There's no escaping the jokes, so they lean in. Postcards, signs, t-shirts, all ringing with proud silliness. You haven't truly toured America until you've mailed a postcard from Ding Dong. But if you think naming a town after sound effects is dumb, wait until you hear about the man who launched a full-blown pizza assault over thermostat drama. A man was arrested after assaulting his roommate with a pizza slice over thermostat settings. In the long, shameful history of roommate disputes, thermostat wars are a recurring battlefield. One person's cozy is another person's sauna, and in cramped living quarters the temperature can quickly rise, both literally and metaphorically. But in this particular case, things escalated from passive-aggressive glares to full-blown pizza-based assault. The argument was about the thermostat setting. One roommate wanted Arctic tundra. The other preferred something just above cremation. Voices were raised, doors slammed, and then, in a sudden fit of carb-loaded rage, one of them grabbed the nearest weapon. A slice of pizza. Not a whole pizza, a slice. Sauce, cheese, and molten fury. He flung it with precision. It hit the other man in the face. A hot, greasy slap of marinara and mozzarella. The victim called the police, and when the officers arrived, they found evidence smeared across the walls, the couch, and the shirt of the accused. There was no denying it. The slice had spoken. He was arrested and charged with battery, the cheesy kind. No one was seriously injured, but the emotional scars, eternal. And from one graveyard of dignity to another, we move on to Maine, where even tombstones weren't safe from ad space. A law in Maine once banned advertisements on tombstones. Capitalism doesn't rest, not even in the grave. At one point, it crept so aggressively into every corner of life that lawmakers in Maine had to draw the line at literal cemeteries. Yes, a law was passed to ban advertisements on tombstones, because someone, somewhere, looked at a headstone and thought, you know what this needs? A sponsorship. The ban wasn't theoretical. It was a direct response to people using gravestones for marketing purposes. Whether it was funeral homes promoting their services or someone genuinely trying to turn the afterlife into a billboard, it happened often enough that the state had to step in. Imagine walking through a peaceful cemetery, mourning your grandmother, and glancing over to see Jim's Auto Repair open Sundays, etched into the granite next to her. It's dystopian. It's tacky. It's extremely on-brand for a country that prints college logos on baby onesies and wedding venues on napkins. The law still exists, an enduring monument to the limits of commercial reach, or at least an attempt to create one. But if you think grave marketing is the height of weaponized desert absurdity, buckle up, because someone in Arizona once tried to rob a gas station with a cactus. A man in Arizona tried to rob a gas station using a cactus. Forget guns. Forget knives. In the sun-baked criminal surrealism of Arizona, a man once stormed a gas station wielding a cactus as a weapon. Not in a pot, not decorative, just a raw wild living cactus, spines and all, clutched like the world's most botanical club. He burst through the doors, shouted his demands, and waved the cactus menacingly at the clerk. One can only imagine the confusion. Was it a joke? Was it performance art? Was this man dangerously underhydrated or just experimenting with desert-themed vigilantism? Either way, the clerk didn't comply. Shock turned to laughter, and eventually the would-be robber fled, cactus in hand, pride in shreds. Police later caught him not far from the scene, still holding his spiky accomplice like a failed sidekick from a Coen Brothers film. It's hard to know what his plan was. Maybe he thought the threat of pain would override the absurdity of the weapon. Or maybe he'd just watched too many cartoons. What we do know is this. When it comes to dumb crimes, Arizona delivers the driest punchlines, both literally and metaphorically. And next, North Dakota steps up with a law that criminalizes falling asleep with your shoes on. Because of course it does. In North Dakota, it's illegal to lie down and fall asleep with your shoes on. There's a law in North Dakota that says you can't lie down and fall asleep with your shoes on. Not in a library, not in a church, anywhere. If your feet are dressed for the day and your brain decides to check out for a nap, congratulations. You may be in violation of state law. At first glance, it sounds like a myth, a folktale born in a frat house. But no, it's real. A law that suggests the line between crime and comfort is drawn precisely at your ankles. The likely origin? Saloons. Back in the Wild West days, passed-out drunks were a common issue. So lawmakers figured if you passed out with your boots still on, it meant you hadn't meant to sleep. You just got too wasted. Barefoot and tucked in? No problem. Fully clothed with mud-caked boots and snoring on the bar floor? That's a public nuisance. So in theory, you can fall asleep barefoot in a ditch and be fine. But do it with boots on, and now you're causing a scandal. It's one of those laws that survives not because it's useful, but because no one's had the energy to repeal it. Probably because they were too tired, with their shoes off. And now we move from outlaw nappers to oddly named places again. Because next up is Breadloaf, Vermont. Yes, another town named after lunch. A town in Vermont is called Breadloaf. Welcome to Breadloaf, Vermont. A town that sounds less like a municipality and more like something you'd yell across a kitchen when you're out of butter. It's quaint, picturesque, and boasts a name so charmingly carb-heavy that even gluten-free tourists can't help but laugh. The name comes from a nearby mountain, Breadloaf Mountain, named for its resemblance to a rising loaf of, you guessed it, bread. Apparently, settlers took one look at the mountain and said, "That's it. That's the one. That's our brand." And so, the town adopted it too. But Breadloaf isn't just a name. It's also a home to the Breadloaf Writers' Conference, one of the oldest and most prestigious gatherings of literary talent in the country. Which means some of America's greatest writers have workshopped their novels, poems, and personal breakdowns in a place named after baked goods. It's Vermont at its most Vermont. Rustic, literary, and absolutely unapologetic about naming a town like it's the hero ingredient in a casserole. And if you think that's wholesome, wait until you meet James Madison, who was so short he once got stuck in a revolving door. James Madison was barely 5 feet tall and once got stuck in a revolving door. Founding father. Architect of the Constitution. Fourth President of the United States. And vertically challenged escape artist. James Madison, the man who helped engineer the very structure of American government, stood just 5'4" inches. And that was likely a generous measurement. Some say he was barely over 5 feet. Either way, he wasn't just short. He was historically short. So short, in fact, that he reportedly got trapped in a revolving door, whether due to bad timing, architectural hostility, or simply getting caught in a geometry he didn't agree with. Madison's encounter with a circular trap remains one of the great visual metaphors for early American bureaucracy. Brilliant ideas stuck in loops. Imagine it. The man who debated federalism versus anti-federalism, caught in a spinning glass contraption, waving politely for help while other statesmen breeze by. It's tragic, comic, and deeply American. Even the most powerful brains can't outwit bad design. Of course, he eventually got out, but not before cementing his place in the bizarre footnotes of U.S. history. He may have been a political giant, but in physical terms, he was one ill-timed rotation away from being furniture. And now, from revolving doors to spinning logic. Up next, a man returns a watermelon because it was too wet inside. A customer once returned a watermelon to Walmart claiming it was too wet inside. Some returns are justified. Others are legendary. This one? It's a masterpiece of consumer entitlement and cognitive dissonance. A man marched into Walmart carrying a watermelon. Not bruised, not rotten, not defective. Just wet inside. You know, like a watermelon. He wasn't joking. He wanted a refund because the fruit, in his words, was too juicy, which is like returning a raincoat because it repelled water too well, or a candle because it smelled too much like the thing it was supposed to smell like. His issue wasn't spoilage. It was that the watermelon fulfilled its biological destiny a little too enthusiastically. Imagine the employee trying to process that return. Standing behind the counter with a barcode scanner in one hand and the entire philosophy of capitalism breaking down in the other. Because what do you say when someone brings back a fruit for being fruit? The return was reportedly processed, either out of sheer awe or because the employee knew there was no winning this fight. Logic had already lost. Somewhere, a receipt was printed, and the watermelon, probably donated, or thrown out, or used as a visual aid in a seminar about customer service and late-stage capitalism. And if you think refunding produce is absurd, wait until we roll into a town in Oregon that's named like it's halfway through a plumbing disaster. Welcome to Drain. There's a town in Oregon called Drain. Yes, Drain. As in the thing in your sink. As in the way your soul feels after a 3-hour Zoom meeting. But this isn't a metaphor, it's a real place. Drain, Oregon. Population just under 1,000, located in the lush, green wilderness of Douglas County. It's the kind of town where people give directions with a smile and then wait for you to snicker like an 8th grader. The name has nothing to do with plumbing, though good luck convincing anyone of that. It was named after Charles Drain, a man who donated land for a railroad depot in the 1800s. Unfortunately for his legacy, nobody remembers the history. They just remember that the name sounds like something that needs snaking every 6 months. Locals have embraced it, sort of. There's a Drain post office, a Drain City Hall, and people who proudly say, "Yes, I'm from Drain," without blinking. Tourists occasionally detour just to take a selfie with the town sign. It's weird. It's charming. It's got a name that works harder against it than any economic recession ever could. But from Drain's civic embarrassment, we jump back into pop culture history, where Ronald Reagan was once upstaged by a literal monkey on the silver screen. Ronald Reagan once starred in a film with a monkey. The monkey got better reviews. Before he became the 40th president of the United States, Ronald Reagan was a Hollywood actor. That's not a secret. What's less remembered, maybe because it feels like a hallucination, is that in one of his films, he played opposite a chimpanzee, and the chimp stole the show. The film, Bedtime for Bonzo, was a lighthearted romp in which Reagan, then a clean-cut leading man with all the charisma of a motivational poster, played a professor trying to teach human morals to a chimp. Predictably, the chimp outperformed him. Not in dialogue, obviously, but in charm, comedic timing, and box office appeal. Critics at the time were polite to Reagan. They were enthusiastic about Bonzo. Imagine being told decades later that the guy who got upstaged by a banana-loving co-star would be in charge of nuclear launch codes. It's the kind of narrative arc that only America could write, from B-movie actor to global superpower broker. And yet, there's something fitting about it. Reagan's political strength was performance. And who better to hone those skills than someone who once shared screen time with an ape and came in second? Coming up next, another disaster of a performance. A woman calls 911 because her car won't start. Turns out the battery was dead, and so was her sense of proportion. A Texas woman called 911 because her car wouldn't start, due to a dead battery. Some people call 911 for medical emergencies. Others for fires, burglaries, or dire situations involving screaming and blood. And then there's the woman in Texas who dialed the emergency line because her car wouldn't start. It didn't explode. It didn't trap a child. It simply failed to go vroom. Turns out the battery was dead, and so apparently was her patience. She told the dispatcher she was stranded, trapped, and afraid for her safety. Dramatic? Yes. Misleading? Absolutely. She was in a parking lot, in broad daylight, with a cell phone, next to a Starbucks. But to her, this was the apocalypse. The dispatcher gently asked if she had tried calling a tow service. Her response? I pay taxes. This is the American mentality in its purest, most bureaucratically entitled form. The belief that emergency responders are just hyper-trained AAA agents. Police were dispatched. They arrived, saw the car, checked the battery, and confirmed that, yes, it was very much dead. They jumped the car and left with a collective eye roll that echoed through the Texas airwaves. And if you thought suing yourself was the dumbest cell phone in American history, get ready, because someone's about to try exactly that again. A man once attempted to sue himself for $5 million and asked the state to pay because he was broke. In a tale that sounds like a rejected Twilight Zone script written by Kafka during a fever dream, one man managed to weaponize legal absurdity by suing himself. Yes, himself, for $5 million. Why? Because of negligence, his own negligence. Here's the logic. The man, currently incarcerated, claimed that his own poor judgment had led him to commit a crime. That crime landed him in prison, where he was now suffering from emotional distress. So naturally, he decided to sue the person responsible, himself, for the trauma. A true Ouroboros of blame and financial delusion. But it gets better. Since he couldn't work or earn money due to being imprisoned, he requested that the state, aka the taxpayers, pay the damages on his behalf. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was performance art in the shape of a legal document. The case, predictably, was thrown out, but not before wasting actual court time, paperwork, and probably some poor clerk's last nerve. The man didn't win, but he did achieve something else, becoming a human paradox in the flesh. The criminal, the victim, and the plaintiff, all in one jumpsuit. Next up, milk, Utah, and a law that punishes cafeteria rebellion with mandatory dairy consumption. In Utah, it's illegal to not drink milk at school lunch. Utah. Land of red rocks, squeaky clean morality, and mandatory calcium. Yes, in this very literal-minded state, there's a law that requires students to drink milk during school lunch. Not just serve it, not just offer it, drink it. As if cow juice was the moral glue holding civilization together. Why? Because milk is good for you. Strong bones, glorious teeth, and somewhere in the legislative process, someone decided that this health benefit should be enforced with the iron fist of law. Forget soda bans. Utah said, you want a peanut butter sandwich? Then finish your milk, kid, or it's a felony. What about lactose intolerance? What about dietary restrictions? The law, as written, makes few accommodations, which means that theoretically, some poor kid with a dairy allergy is either breaking the law or breaking out in hives. In practice, it's rarely enforced. But the fact that it exists is peak American nutritional authoritarianism, where freedom ends and dairy begins. It's not about hydration, it's about order. And if you think that's dramatic, wait until you hear about a man who called 911 at a wedding because someone took a bite of his sandwich. A man called 911 because someone took a bite out of his sandwich at a wedding. Weddings are emotional minefields. The tension, the alcohol, the small talk with cousins you haven't seen since 2003. Add food into the mix, and things can go feral. But one man took things to a level so absurd, so aggressively trivial, it deserves permanent engraving on the wall of American overreactions. During the reception, someone, we'll never know who, took a bite of this man's sandwich. Not stole the whole thing, not poisoned it, just a bite, a chomp, a minor violation. Most people would roll their eyes, grab another canapé, and let it go. But this guest, he called 911. He wanted justice for his sandwich. The dispatcher, likely expecting a medical emergency or a drunken fight, instead got a report on missing roast beef. The man was indignant. It was mine, he repeated. The police came. And while there wasn't much they could do, short of starting a forensic crumb analysis, the man insisted a theft had occurred, and that it ruined the wedding. No arrests were made, but his legacy is eternal. The guest who brought a crisis to the reception table. And if you think that's a confusing location, Wait until we visit Jersey Shore in Pennsylvania. Yes, inland. There's a town in Pennsylvania called Jersey Shore, nowhere near the ocean. Picture the name Jersey Shore. Now erase the beach, the boardwalk, the smell of sunscreen, and regret. Replace it with central Pennsylvania. Quiet roads, small diners, and exactly 0 waves. That's the actual town of Jersey Shore. A place so geographically ironic, it practically screams map? Never heard of it. The name originated in the 1800s when settlers from New Jersey founded the area and, in a staggering lack of imagination, called it Jersey Shore. They weren't near a shore, or even a significant puddle, but tradition stuck, and so did the name. The town has no snooki, no nightclubs, no tanning salons, just an endless stream of confused tourists who arrive with cameras and leave with existential crises. Locals have leaned into the joke, because what else can you do when your town sounds like a rejected MTV spinoff? It's one of those places that seems like it exists just to mess with GPS systems and out-of-state expectations. A quiet punchline hiding in the Appalachian foothills, and if you thought misplaced names were the worst sin committed by a U.S. president, buckle up. Franklin Pierce once gave his entire inauguration speech, completely drunk. Franklin Pierce gave his entire inauguration speech while completely drunk. Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States, is remembered for almost nothing, except maybe for how he started his presidency. Blitzed out of his mind. On March 4, 1853, he stumbled through his inauguration speech while clearly, undeniably hammered. And this wasn't a short toast. It was a full address, slurred, rambling, soggy with alcohol and whatever despair fueled Pierce's soul. It was snowing. It was cold. And Pierce, who had recently lost his young son in a horrific train accident, was in no condition to speak to the nation. But rather than cancel or reschedule or even tone it down, he did what many 19th century men did when faced with pain and power. He drank. A lot. Witnesses described the speech as disjointed and unfocused. He reportedly forgot entire paragraphs, mumbled through others, and at one point might have mistaken the Bible for a hat. Okay, maybe not that last part, but the vibe? It was tragicomic. A grieving man thrust into office, trying to mask devastation with whiskey and protocol. Pierce's presidency didn't get much better from there. He's consistently ranked among the worst presidents in American history. And it all started with a drunken monologue in the snow. Next up, a Florida man and a flying alligator. Yes, through a Wendy's drive-thru window. Welcome to Florida again. A man in Florida was arrested for throwing a gator through a Wendy's drive-thru window. There are many ways to express dissatisfaction with your fast food order. You can write a passive-aggressive Yelp review. You can demand to see a manager. Or if you're a particular brand of Florida man, you can weaponize a live alligator and throw it through a Wendy's drive-thru window like you're auditioning for a reptile-themed version of Jackass. Yes, this happened. A man, reportedly in a mischievous mood and with access to a small gator, not a stuffed toy, not a fake prop, but an actual snapping prehistoric lizard, decided to hurl it through the service window mid-transaction. Because nothing says I'd like fries with that, like biological terrorism via swamp monster. The gator landed inside the restaurant, causing immediate chaos. Employees screamed. Customers ran. One poor soul probably dropped their Frosty. And while no one was hurt, including the gator, the act was enough to get the man arrested and charged with assault with a deadly animal. This is peak Florida. A state where nature, absurdity, and very bad ideas collide in humid harmony. But if you thought a rogue reptile was wild, just wait. Our next entry involves a tent, a little rain, and one woman's quest to return nature itself for poor customer service. A woman demanded a refund for a tent because it rained during her camping trip. Camping, at its core, is a gamble against nature. You bring a nylon shelter, some granola, and a wildly misplaced sense of optimism, and you hope the sky doesn't punish you. But for one woman, the universe's decision to drizzle was apparently grounds for litigation. After a rainy weekend in the woods, she returned to the store where she bought her tent and demanded a full refund. Her complaint? It had rained. That's it. The tent wasn't torn. The zippers worked. The stakes held. But the weather, that merciless, unpredictable phenomenon known as climate, had betrayed her. And in her eyes, that meant the product was defective. She believed the tent should have somehow prevented rain, or perhaps made the rain less wet, or who knows, negotiated a better forecast with the clouds in advance. The store employees, torn between confusion and barely restrained laughter, declined the refund. This wasn't buyer's remorse. It was atmospheric entitlement. The belief that camping should be more like staying in a hotel lobby, but with more trees and fewer consequences. And speaking of difficulty, let's head to Tennessee, where the town's name is quite literally difficult. Because of course it is. A town in Tennessee is called Difficult. Some towns are named to inspire, others to honor. Then there's Difficult, Tennessee, a place that doesn't sugarcoat the experience. It's not trying to lure tourists. It's not here for branding. It's just brutally, beautifully honest. Living here might be a challenge. The story goes that when settlers were applying for a post office in the 1800s, they submitted multiple potential names, all of which were rejected for being too similar to other towns. Frustrated, they finally wrote back to the Postal Service, allegedly saying, "It is very difficult to find a suitable name." And with the dry, bureaucratic flair of a tired clerk, the postmaster stamped it, Difficult, and the name stuck. Today, it's a tiny, unincorporated community nestled in Smith County, surrounded by rolling hills and the occasional raised eyebrow. It doesn't boast a Starbucks or a stoplight, but it does have character, and a name that feels like a permanent shrug. Being from Difficult is probably a great way to test someone's sense of humor. And if you're still with us, you'll need it, because the next story involves presidential tragedy and the posthumous assassination of Abraham Lincoln's dog. Abraham Lincoln's dog, Fido, was assassinated after Lincoln's death. Fido was supposed to be spared. When Abraham Lincoln left Springfield for Washington, D.C., he decided not to bring his beloved dog, fearing the chaos of the Capitol, and perhaps knowing his presidency would be anything but calm. So he left Fido in the care of a trusted family friend, asking only that the dog be treated gently, never tied up, and allowed inside like a member of the household. After Lincoln's assassination, America mourned. But what few remember is that just a year later, tragedy struck again, this time in the form of a neighborhood boy with a knife. Fido, reportedly startled and nipping in defense, was killed in retaliation. It wasn't just a dog's death. It was a grotesque echo of violence, a symbolic extension of Lincoln's assassination that left historians stunned. This dog, loyal, harmless, and left behind out of kindness, became collateral in the theater of human cruelty. There's no memorial for Fido, no statue, just an anecdote tucked in the darker margins of Civil War lore. A reminder that even innocence isn't safe in the wake of legacy. And while that's a hard act to follow, America finds a way. Up next, a man who sued Apple because his iPhone was too addictive. A man sued Apple for making him addicted to his iPhone. In the age of screen time tracking and digital detoxes, it was probably only a matter of time before someone took it to court. One man decided that the real villain wasn't his lack of self-control. It was Apple. He claimed the company had created a product so compelling, so captivating, so diabolically engaging, that he couldn't help but spend his life glued to it. So he sued. His argument was simple. The iPhone was designed to be addictive. The colors, the alerts, the haptic feedback, all intentional, like a Vegas slot machine in your pocket. And because of that, he demanded compensation for the hours he lost, the relationships that suffered, and the dopamine loops that kept him from living his real life. It didn't work. But the lawsuit existed, and it made a point, even if it was wrapped in absurdity. Yes, tech is addictive. Yes, algorithms manipulate. But filing a lawsuit against the company that gave you access to Wikipedia, dating apps, and cat memes may not be the flex you think it is. Still, it was a very modern form of helplessness. And up next, we rewind to a much simpler time, when road signs and logic collided. Let's visit Y, Arizona. There's a Y town in Arizona. It was named that because it was at a Y-shaped intersection. In southern Arizona, nestled in the desert near the Mexican border, lies a town named Y. Not why not evil, just why. It sounds existential, like the ghost of a philosophy major whispering into the GPS. But the origin is wonderfully literal. The town formed near a Y-shaped intersection of two highways. Locals, likely bored and heat-stroked, decided to name it Y. But Arizona law required town names to be at least 3 letters. So in the greatest shrug of municipal history, they changed the letter into a word, Y. And so it remains. A town named not for confusion, but for compliance, which in a way is very American. Rules were followed, bureaucracy was obeyed, and absurdity was immortalized on a green road sign. Today, Y is a quiet blip in the desert, a place you probably wouldn't notice unless you needed gas or a strange anecdote for a podcast. But it's also a small testament to how a simple decision can echo forever in maps, memories, and people Googling funny town names. And if you thought that was silly, just wait until a customer complains to a store because their ice was too cold. A store once got a customer complaint, "Your ice is too cold." Ah, yes. The eternal paradox of modern customer service. No matter how correctly you do your job, someone will find a reason to be offended. Case in point, a retail establishment once received a formal complaint from a customer who was genuinely upset that their ice was too cold. Yes, that frozen water, that solid H2O meant, by definition, to be cold, had apparently crossed a line. How cold is too cold for ice? That remains a mystery, lost to the philosophical wasteland of Yelp reviews and Karen energy. But the complaint wasn't sarcastic. It was written in full earnestness. The customer felt the ice was painfully cold to the touch and made the drink uncomfortable. Let that sink in. The employee who received the complaint probably stared at it the way a medieval monk might look at a toaster, with confusion, horror, and a deep, creeping sense that reality was unraveling. And yet, someone had to respond. Apologies were probably made, vouchers handed out, because the customer is always right, even when they're asking for warmer ice. But if you think unreasonable expectations stop at frozen cubes, wait until we ride into Colorado, where it's illegal, yes, illegal, to ride a horse while drunk. In Colorado, it's illegal to ride a horse while under the influence. You might think that getting a DUI means operating a motor vehicle. Not so fast, cowboy. In the great state of Colorado, land of mountains, weed tourism, and aggressive outdoor enthusiasts, you can get cited for riding a horse while intoxicated. That's right. Drunk on horseback equals criminal offense. It makes a strange sort of sense. A horse, after all, is still a mode of transportation. A 200-pound sentient one with opinions and hooves. Let an inebriated fool climb into the saddle, and you've got a recipe for disaster that could involve trampling, kicking, or someone accidentally galloping into a Cracker Barrel. Historically, this law emerged from frontier logic. Drunk riding wasn't just dangerous, it was chaotic. Back in the day, drunk cowboys didn't just swerve on horses, they dueled on them. So modern legislation carried over the concern. If you can't legally drive while tipsy, you sure as hell shouldn't be steering an animal with a brain of its own. Yet it raises deeper questions. What counts as drunk? Does the horse get a breathalyzer too? And where does this end? Tipsy roller skates? Buzzed pogo sticks? Speaking of questionable sentience, let's head to Ohio where a man tried to sue for damages because his pet rock didn't do tricks. A man in Ohio demanded compensation because his pet rock didn't do tricks. Yes, you read that correctly. A man, an adult human man with presumably a legal name and a mailbox, actually demanded compensation because his pet rock didn't perform tricks. Not in jest. Not as satire. With full legal seriousness, he argued that he had purchased a defective product, a rock that failed to entertain. We've seen lawsuits over hot coffee, misprinted labels, and the absence of a Harrier jet in a Pepsi promotion. But this was next level. The man believed that the product's advertising, perhaps a tongue-in-cheek nod to the absurdity of the pet rock craze, had promised more than just a lump of geological silence. He wanted action, maybe a flip, a roll, a gentle nod of approval. When it failed to do any of these things and remained predictably rock-like, he claimed emotional distress, false advertising, a breach of the sacred pet owner contract. Needless to say, the complaint didn't go far. But it does raise an important philosophical point. In a society that commodifies everything, even a rock can disappoint you. And with that, we close out this anthology of idiocy. A full cycle through the glorious, baffling, and magnificently dumb decisions stitched across U.S. history like a flag made of punchlines and face palms.